Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, slightly late start, in the best Southwark traditions, obviously. I just want to welcome everybody to the meeting of this Reunion Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Ian Wingfield. I'm the chair of the committee. Before we start the meeting, I've just got a few housekeeping announcements to make. There are no planned fire alarm tests this evening. If you hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is St John's Churchyard off Druid Street, and council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off the main reception area. Please switch your mobile phones to silent whilst in the meeting room. The meeting is being live streamed to Southwark Council's YouTube channel. A recording of the meeting will also be viewable on YouTube once the meeting has concluded. May I remind members of the committee to raise your hand if you wish to speak, and please wait until I've given you permission to speak before contributing. In addition, when the chair speaks, other members should stop speaking and not interrupt the chair. Members can ask any questions on the issue under discussion and can move any recommendations also on the issue under discussion. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot or tweet public proceedings of the meeting, and a copy of the council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. So, if that's all clear, we can begin. So item 1 is apologies. I have received apologies for absence from Councillor Irina von Visa, and who's being deputised this evening by Councillor Rachel Bailey, and good evening, and Bentley, sorry. Bentley and Martin Brecknell, who's one of the co-opted educational reps, has given his apologies. I've also received apologies from Councillor Caroline Thwaites, the Assistant Director for Community Safety and Partnerships, due to illness, and Councillor Jason Ottery will be late because he's covering a ward surgery. Okay, there's no other apologies for this evening. Okay, so we can confirm the voting members. Obviously, I've already introduced myself, and I'll go around the table. I'll first of all start with Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rachel Bentley, North Bermondsey Ward Deputy.
Very much. Councillor Batcher.
Susanna Batcher, Cumberwood.
Councillor Brown.
Councillor Cassandra Brown, South Bermondsey Ward and Chair of the Education and Local Commission.
Thank you, Councillor Chamberlain.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Victor Chamberlain, Borough Bankside and Leader.
Very much. Councillor Johnson.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Councillor Leeming.
Councillor Richard Leeming, Dulwich Bridge Ward.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Councillor Beckham Roberts, Robert Harley.
And Councillor Seaton.
Councillor Marcus Seaton, North Ward.
Thank you. Item 2, notification of any items of business. Oh,
And
did I miss you off? Oh, I'm sorry.
that's okay. Councillor Esme Hicks, Champion Hill Ward.
Thank you. Excuse me, sorry. In my haste. Okay, item 2, notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. There's no additional late items. 3 items, disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare any interest or dispensation in respect of any item on the agenda? No? Very much. Minutes, item 4. Can we approve as correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of June? That agreed?
Agreed.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll move on now to item 5, the Southwark Community Safety Partnership. For this item, we are blessed with the presence of Councillor Natasha Ennin, the Cabinet Member for Community Safety and Neighbourhoods, who will be presenting the Southwark Community Safety Working Together for a Safer Southwark item, and supported by Stephen Douglas, the Director of Stronger Neighbourhoods. We've also got external partners present. We've got Darren Summers from the ICB. Do you want to just put your hand up? Yep, there we are. Very good. Daniel Capon, there's from London Fire Brigade. Yeah, thank you very much. Superintendent Jim Brockway from the Met Police. Thank you very much. And Emma Bond. Good evening. And we've also got Emma Connor, the head of the Southwark Probation Delivery Unit, remotely. Is that correct? Very good. Right. Would you all like to step forward, please? Sorry? Oh, there's somebody else as well. Yes. Okay. No, I got it right this time. Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, you can choose what you want to be this evening, but please come forward. Due to various cuts, we haven't got enough microphones to go around for each individual person, so you'll have to share the microphone when you're called upon. I believe, Councillor Ennin, you're going to make a statement first, and then we'll hear from the officers and partners. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Forgive me, I do have a bit of a cold. I'm really, really delighted to be back here. We came in February to talk about the Community Safety Partnership and the work that's being undertaken within that space. One of the key things that we spoke about when I last attended the OSC was that community safety was one of the top 3 priorities for our residents. And in order for us to understand what is happening in that space, it's really important that all of the partners come to the Commission to discuss their role in setting the strategic direction for community safety. And how we do that is through our annual strategic assessments, because that's where we agree our priorities to keep our local residents safe within our communities. I've been co-chairing the CSP since 2023. And it's really important that in that space, we don't actually have residents there. So often policies, strategies that are being created, there isn't a resident voice. So what we've been able to do is make sure that residents' voices are included, not only by having an elected member present, but also through the work that we do locally with the DCS Borough Commander. And some of the key things that we've looked at. Sorry, I've become a bit distracted. Sorry, I've got a bit of no, it's just I'm a bit flu-y. Forgive me. So through the refreshed strategic assessment, what we've focused on has been cutting thematic priorities around violence and vulnerability, reducing drug-related harm, violence against women and girls, trust and confidence, and safer sociable estates. What I was actually speaking about was the role that I play as an elected member, as a co-chair of the CSP, and the role that I have in co-chairing that board with our borough commander. It's really important because it gives us an oversight of what's happening locally and some of our subgroups. The officers will speak about the thematic priorities. As a co-chair, my focus has really been around police accountability and trust and the trust and confidence plan. Sorry, in regards to the policing oversight board, this is something that we launched in December last year, and this is where we had independent board members. It was deeply shocking to see the Panorama documentary a week from today, in light of the fact that the board was set up as a response to the case review. And the independent board has worked really, really hard to focus on that local trust and confidence plan, and has really, really made efforts to showcase the fantastic work that the police are doing locally. But there are ongoing concerns. It's just been heart-wrenching in light of some of the other issues that we've seen in terms of public protests and across the piece. And it's been a big challenge. It's been a big challenge, but what we have been able to do is to focus on those key things that residents have told us matter to them. Engagement, increased visibility of the police, as well as what we're doing to reduce crime and theft in those areas. The other thing that I focused on quite a bit has been around disproportionality. Often when we talk about disproportionality, we talk about stop and searches, but disproportionality is more than that. When we look at the number of crimes that are being committed, they're disproportionately committed by men. So disproportionality has to be more than stop and search. It's really about how we're investing in the social capital of our young men as a piece, and also what we're doing to reduce some of those robbery figures in the area. Safety of women has been a key priority. As I set out when I came to the board last February, through some data insights that we had gotten through the Resident Insight Survey, one of the key things that was reported is that women didn't feel safe in our borough at night. So we've invested money in our nighttime uniform patrol presence. We're continuing our work around public space walk, and we're launching a groundbreaking women's safety centre, which focuses on that partnership. And our work in terms of women has not only been based on, looking at data, it's actually been based on speaking to women. So every year we have an annual women's safety survey, which looks at key hotspot areas in which women feel unsafe. There's been dedicated resource through our environmental visual audits, where we're actually designing out crime in those key areas. And we're making sure that we're targeting young women. This is in addition to the safe havens that we have and our safe spaces. One of the key things that has stood out to me is that we're such a big landlord in the borough. We have the highest amount of stock in London. So ASB is a particular challenge, and it's still underreported. So one of the things that you would have seen is that I've been going across this borough, engaging with residents, making sure that we're increasing their opportunities to report directly to us, but also understanding the channels by which they can report. And also, I'm really happy to see that a lot more work has been done by the police, as well as our community safety wardens, in tackling persistent offenders, because it really blights our estates. I've done walkabouts with many of the members on this panel, and one of the things that strikes me is when we hear women saying that they don't want their children to play outside because of concerns that they will get involved in gangs, or where we're witnessing people smoking cannabis on the stairs, or Class A drugs being used. So the key thing is, as a result of the work that we're doing around our ASB on our estates, what we're doing is we've got area action plans that focuses on Aylesbury, Peckham, Burgess Park and East Walworth, but significantly we're running a pilot to look at drug usage on key estates, and 3 estates have been targeted, which will be the Brimington in Nunhead and Queen's Road, St Saviour's in London Bridge and West Bermondsey. This area in particular is being blighted because it's a nighttime economy area, high footfalls, and there have been key concerns around drug usage. And then is it Nelson and Portland. So really, this is your opportunity to ask of the partnership how they are working in delivering on those thematic priorities. And it's your opportunity to make recommendations about what you think the partnership can do differently. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is somebody going to take us through this? You are. Good. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Steve.
I'll just take you briefly through the presentation that was circulated prior to this meeting. Before I do that, just 3 things to say on data. The first is covered in the supplementary information that was published, and that was that this was a period where police changed their system to what's now called Connect and Chris. And of course, that makes talking about what's increased, what's decreased year on year much more challenging. However, we still get a sense from the data of the clear steer on priorities, and that's not just a Southwark issue; it's a London-wide issue. The second one is that in some cases where we do see increases in numbers of certain crime types, that may well be given in a meeting earlier today. So where the police find persistent offenders, that then generates of more offences that are loaded on the system. So it's just a few caveats to how you interpret the data. And the final one is that some areas, whilst rather all these numbers were zero, you do actually want to see increases. So Councillor Ennin about ASB and how underreported that is. Some of the research, over 50% of cases don't get reported. We know from some of the activities.
Sorry, can you just pull the microphone a bit closer?
So the last ASB awareness week, when we're out about around the borough, raising awareness of ASB and encouraging reporting, we did see spikes in reporting following that. So there's some areas where those increases are positive. Turning to the presentation, what I'll do is just give a brief overview of the role of the Community Safety Partnership, and just a reminder of what it is. Secondly, is take you through the summary of the annual strategic assessment. It's very thorough and robust assessment, so the whole thing is a substantial document. What that means in terms of the new community safety plan for the period 25 to 2030 and the draft priorities, and then the opportunity for discussion and questions with all of the key partners. So moving on to the next slide. So the Community Safety Partnership is statutory. Statutory partners are listed there, so it's local authority, health, patient, and LFB. And it's all about working together to prevent crime and disorder. We are statutorily obliged to undertake this exercise of an annual strategic assessment, so data and insight, and that informing that community safety plan. But there are other statutory duties in there. We now have a serious violence strategy that was introduced after the serious violence duty came in. And just in terms of the structure of the partnerships, there's a main community safety partnership, and then 5 boards sit under that look at thematic areas. So one is violence against girls, the second is vulnerability, the third is the combating drugs partnership, the fourth, the police oversight board, which has been talked about, and the fifth, the priority is called creating safe and sociable estates and neighbourhoods, but that's all about antisocial behaviour and about the area-based work that Councillor Ennin touched on. So that's the partnership. Just in terms of the kind of golden thread, which is on the next slide. Again, this was touched on earlier, so the 2030, that demonstrating how much of a priority for residents' safety is through the Community Safety Partnership and Plan, the annual strategic assessment, and how that informs how we operate as a partnership and how we operate this area as a local authority. So moving on to the headlines of what the assessment tells us in terms of potential crime types that should be priorities. That's on the next slide. So bringing all of this stuff together, volumes of crimes, the change in the volume of crime, harm score, public opinions, so what residents have told us. We end up with robbery, sexual offences, theft, violence against the person, and ASB popping out of that priority matrix. So just to go through some of the numbers in a little more detail, moving on to the next slide. So in terms of crime and disorder, overall looks like an increase of offences, but bearing in mind the caveats that I talked about before. But of course, the bulk of crime that's reported is theft. So something like 50% of that number is theft of various various kinds. And there is also on that slide some of the hotspots there. I'll also highlight that prevent referrals. So this is referral of people for support who are vulnerable to being drawn into violent extremism. In Southwark, like everywhere, has seen huge increases, and there are a range of reasons for that. One of them being the Southwark incident, and that prompted more referrals and went right across the country, but we saw that in Southwark as well. So moving on to the next slide, in relation to drug-related harm and ASB, which is the next theme. Some positives here, slightly more people entering the treatment system, more young people entering the treatment system, because Southwark has a relatively high rate of drug-related deaths, so higher than the inner London average, but at roughly the national average. And of course, whilst from this data it looks like ASB reports decreased, what we did see is an overall increase in reports of ASB that were related in some way to drugs. So there's a trend there. Drugs is so important to all. It's such a key driver to any type of crime, and in particular to serious violence. And again, some hotspots identified there. So moving on to the next slide, in terms of violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, there's a box at the bottom of in the centre of the bottom of the slide that talks about the Women's Safety Survey for 2025, and shocking to see that of those that that survey responded to that survey, 70% reported having experienced some form of gender-based violence. So a really important priority for us. We did see what appeared to be a decrease in reports of public space for, but still a relatively high number of reports. And another area where we're keen to see more reporting. So moving on to serious violence, where victims or suspects are under 25 years. It's a London and a local priority. It appears in the most police and crime plan for London. It was talked about by residents, the engagement that was done around Southwark 2030 as being one of the things that they were concerned about. We saw the data decreases in personal robbery, decreases in serious violence, but still numbers that mean this needs to continue to be a priority. So moving on to the next slide, whilst a lot of this was about analysis of various kinds of data, police, ambulance, and other data, the community voice and resident insight is really important in forming this work. And just two things that the slide summarises. One is that thing about how important safety and feelings of safety are to everyone in the community. In particular, things like women being unsafe after night, after dark, being a particular concern here in Southwark. And then the second thing I highlight on that slide is those levels of trust and confidence in policing. That clearly is something important for together to address. So some progress in terms of that feeling of safety, but still a massive issue for our residents. So taking all of that together and moving on to the next slide, what that does is supports the 5 priorities, which are broad and promoting women's safety, reducing violence and vulnerability, reducing drug-related harm, increasing trust and confidence in policing, and antisocial behaviour, creating safe and sociable neighbourhoods. So supports the existing priorities. The next few slides in the pack give you examples of three things. The first is why these things matter. The second is just some of the numbers, some of the things that have been achieved in the period before this assessment, and then a little more things that the new plan will suggest we deliver. So I'll just go through a few of those. In terms of Borg and women's safety, why it matters. Well, I've talked about the thing safety after dark, but of course it's women and girls that disproportionately face domestic abuse, harassment, sexual violence. So women's safety remains a key priority. Some numbers: 1,150 referrals to our domestic abuse service, with others supported at home. Through our eyes, 1.7 million people viewing that anti-misogyny campaign aimed at young men. Now over 50 businesses signed up to our Women's Night Safety Charter, and Councillor Emin talked about EVA's hotspots, that kind of thing. And in terms of what we deliver, our new integrated Borg service and the Women's Safety Centre, expanded work in schools and businesses, raising awareness and working with keeping people safe, and more visible public space safety measures, including that focus on safety and others. So moving on to violence and vulnerability, something that impacts young people and groups in particular. There are some local hotspots just in terms of some of the things we've achieved. Our own Southwark Violence Reduction Unit, the Community Harm and Exploitation Hub, has dealt with over 200 young people. That's a programme about diverting people away from crime through a whole range of things: employment, education, training, etc. Night bins and diversion schemes are our Routes programme, which is safe routes after school, modern slavery referrals, our anti-theft campaign targeting people with mobile phones, raising their awareness of how to avoid crime. In terms of future further plans to tackle theft, person and shoplifting, our area action plan, and then referred to that target resources around those hotspot areas, our local violence reduction plan, and strengthening the modern slavery and county lines response. Moving on to drugs and drug-related harm on the next slide. As I mentioned before, this is critical. It provides violence, health inequalities, and antisocial behaviour. At the moment, about 20% of all ASB calls referring to drugs as an issue. I talked about that increase in numbers in treatment. So 1,705 adults engaged. Young people in treatment, which is really positive, above the pre-COVID baseline. We have a borough drugs profile. After that, we established a drug and alcohol death panel, joint operations with police and others to disrupt supply, and things like anti-spiking campaigns with biking, with venues which have been out and about borough. In terms of what we'll deliver, new community drug and alcohol service contracts in 26-27, expanded school prevention works, and this campaign out and about at the moment. preparedness plan for synthetic opioids, which is an issue, more controls, and so on. So moving on to increasing trust and confidence in policing. Fairly obvious trust eroded by national scandals, by Casey Review findings. Black and minority ethnic residents and women in particular reporting lower confidence in policing. And trust being so important, without trust, crime goes unreported and safety is undermined. Carried out a series of community conversations to shape local priorities. There is a police Southwark Trust and Confidence plan that was referred to earlier. The Policing Oversight Board has been talked about, and mechanisms of scrutiny of stop and search, taser use, BORG, neighbourhood policing, and so on. We are due to publish the first Policing Oversight Board annual report shortly. And that work of resident-led scrutiny of policing practices will continue. And finally, looking at creating safe and sociable neighbourhoods and antisocial behaviour. This, of course, undermines community pride and safety, and residents consistently rank this as among their top concerns. We've invested £3 million in our CCTV system, so that work is ongoing. More operators, more coverage. We've expanded our community wardens. They are using new enforcement powers. The nighttime patrol service has been mentioned. Additional police resources, so new town centre teams in Peckham and around the Elephant Castle. The Aylesbury estate work, which some of you will be familiar with, 400 plus flats cleared, 11 squats closed, so big joint operation to deal with some of the issues there. And we've been out consulting on ASB and PSPOs, so that is underway. And in terms of what we'll deliver, those sustained area action plans, which have been mentioned a number of times, joint patrols and integrated enforcement, and co-designed resident solutions for safer spaces. That's the presentation. You have, as you know, all of the key strategic partners here. So,
Thank you, Stephen. I just wanted to welcome Councillor Autry to the meeting. Do any of the partners want to make any statements before I throw it open to members' questions? We're just happy to take the questions. Fair enough? Jolly good. Okay, so it's over to members now. So as you're here for the first time, take Councillor Bentley first. Yes, well, as long as it's not 10.
Thank you very much. And I agree with a lot of the kind of big picture issues that you've painted. And I think, Councillor Annan, you mentioned the Panorama programme, which clearly has not helped the image police, the Met Police, and I think it would be helpful to hear some comments on that if possible. But what I wanted to say is particularly around violence against women and girls. There does seem to be, I was with some teenagers the other week who all reported incidents of being of indecent exposure whilst they were waiting for the bus in the middle of the day, then being followed on buses. And it was clear that none of them knew that that was actually a crime. They just thought it was kind of something that they had to put up with. So I think there is some issue there around kind of what should be reported as a crime versus what should be reported as ASB. So thinking about kind of education about that point, I think would be really helpful. The other thing that you mentioned as well, Councillor Ennin, is about, that we're such a large landlord, and that point around our estates. And I think all of the elected members on this panel have traipsed around those estates in the dark, knocking on doors. And just too many are absolutely terrifying. The lighting and the overgrown foliage, it doesn't feel safe. And I think that really there is an issue there. Stephen, you referred to the CCTV that's being rolled out, but in all too many cases, I think I hear that it's expensive, it's not monitored. What's the point of it? It is there for a deterrent. So it'd also be helpful to hear a bit more about that. And then finally, on the synthetic opioids, I'm not quite sure whether he's the former borough commander or borough commander on leave. I remember him kind of when he came into post talking about synthetic opioids as a real growing problem then. What is it, 2 years later, hearing that they're still being seen as a growing problem, really it'd be helpful to understand what's happening kind of more London-wide around those as an issue, because clearly the level of severity and harm that they are causing versus the drugs that we might have been used in the past is deeply concerning. Thank you.
Who wants to reply to that? Yes, please.
Move first. So can you hear me? Emma Bond. So I'm the temporary BCU commander for Southwark. So if I just first of all talk about Charing Cross. So obviously it was shocking. I feel embarrassed, ashamed as a police officer of 28 years to see that, to witness that, and just vile, horrible behaviour. And I think what's so disappointing now is, as we've seen before about Hotton, it was at Charing Cross, and then obviously people have seen again another incident at Charing Cross, and so I totally understand people's concerns around trust and confidence in policing. And I think then for me it's disappointing because all of the work that we do together and we work hard on the borough, it then will erode trust and confidence in that work that we're doing, and also in the officers and the good work that's being done. So I do acknowledge how you all must be feeling and the community feeling, and we're working hard. As you've seen, the Commissioner a couple of years ago when he came into post, he invested heavily in anti-corruption and to exit officers out of the force who shouldn't be in our force and shouldn't represent us. And we continue to do that, and we will continue to do that and be robust about it. And as you've seen from Charing Cross already, they've suspended officers that have been involved there. There's a change of leadership at Charing Cross. So there is work ongoing and work to be done, and you'll obviously see that play out as it plays out through the court system or whatever that looks like moving forward. And then from our BCU perspective, we're working hard within the BCU to encourage that psychological safety so that people, because I think you'll recognise, as I did when you watch that, actually some of that behaviour isn't just things that have just happened. And actually, so for me, it was about making sure that we have psychological safety so people can, so that officers will report wrongdoing when they see it, so that we don't end up with missing red flags, and when we could have dealt with something earlier on, and then we deal with a much bigger issue. So we're doing things on the borough on the BCU around, we have an internal culture board and we have culture champions, and we're doing work to try and encourage reporting, identify wrongdoing so that we can be robust, because we don't want that in our force. So if that's in relation to Charing Cross. And in relation to the drugs, if I take up that bit, we do a lot of work with ADA and with our investigation strand around the drugs problem. It is a problem. It's a London-wide problem. It's a UK-wide problem, and we continue to try and understand that issue and to address those and target those individuals who are supplying those drugs, and it's an ongoing challenge for us, as it is across the rest of the UK and the rest of London. And if you want to come in any more.
So from a synthetic opioid perspective, from a more operational perspective, we do see incidents locally. I still would classify it as emerging. I don't think we've particularly changed too much from when that would have been first raised to you as a group. I think Stephen is right. It still is an emerging threat. We see other types of drugs which are far more prevalent. So I think we just need to be alive on that, on a particular issue. We would operate on any information intelligence that was offered up to us from either a neighbourhood perspective or from a more investigative perspective. It's still not the most commonplace drug that we would come across. usually I can make my voice heard very well, so I'm surprised you can't hear me. So it's not the most common drug that we would find. The more traditional drugs that we would potentially talk about as a group are still there and are still prevalent. So I understand that the question mark is why is it emerging now than it is 2 years ago, but I think it's that more worldwide concept that potentially puts it into that space for me. Do have seizures locally, but it's still not where it is.
No, I knew there was somebody extra on the table there. I forgot to introduce the Strategic Director for the Environment, Alid Richards. Good evening, you're welcome. Was there something else you wanted to say?
I just wanted to pick up those other points that were made on CCTV. Our public realm CCTV system is monitored 24/7, so there are staff watching the cameras. Obviously, they can't look at all cameras at all times, but they are all recording 24/7. CCTV isn't a panacea; it has a role. I've seen some extraordinary examples of where it's been used to prepare evidence packages that have helped bring justice, where it's been used to divert resources to the right place, so police, fire, or whatever, where it's been used to find missing persons. But it does have its uses, and there are some great successes there. Some really good work done on robbery in particular, actually, either spotting incidents or after an incident has taken place, helping to identify a perpetrator. So it does have a role, and we work with police and other on accessing that.
Sorry, can I just confirm so that's the public realm CCTV, but what about the CCTV on our estates? Is that monitored 24/7?
It's recording 24/7. I don't believe it's monitored 24/7, but that's not connected to our public realm system. In terms of what you say about organ reporting, we do an awful lot of work to encourage people to report things and to be clear about what is and isn't acceptable behaviour. That Through Our Eyes campaign was about nudging on, getting people into the mindset of a victim of this sort of stuff. There is more of that to do. Should never accept the kind of behaviours. Should always report, described there, and we do as much as we can to try and encourage that. And in terms of being a large landlord, our teams do work with housing colleagues around issues like ASB on estates, we have a team of that are dedicated to council estates. We have the SASBU team who work with housing officers and others, because we do also use some of the levers that being a landlord gives us. So where there is a crime or antisocial behaviour that you can connect to a tenancy, then we will take action. We will seek position of people who have abused their neighbours.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel, in regards to the work about teenagers and indecent exposure, if we could take this out of here so we can make sure that those young people get the relevant support. Secondly, we have a team of Southwark youth advisors that deliver a number of projects, especially around healthy relationships, and part of that work is peer-to-peer work. I would hope that a young person that experiences indecent exposure would know that somebody exposing their phallus in public is completely unacceptable in any event, and that they would have confidence to report to their school and to their parents so that action can be taken. We're definitely working with schools through the Vorg Strategic Alliance, and we've got some dedicated resource through our new providers. Part of the work around the Vorg, the Safety Centre, has been around that transformation from domestic abuse to recognising public space Vorg and understanding that there is an issue and young people are disproportionately impacted. So that work is underway in Train, and we definitely have peer-to-peer support. So if there are schools or key locations where there are problems, do let us know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got 5 members have indicated already. I'm going to bring Councillor Leeming, then Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wingfield. I have 2 questions. I've just got to know a detective superintendent in the London Borough, not this one, other side of the river, socially. And I had a very interesting conversation with him recently about the use of facial recognition. My acquaintance thinks it's absolutely brilliant because it allows them to arrest lots of miscreants all in one go. He was also, though, aware of the potential for it being unpopular, and certainly he quoted the local council that he deals with as finding it very unpopular. So I wondered whether we're using facial recognition to find in crowded spaces to find people that it's looking for, and if so, what guidelines are there or governance procedures are there around that to ensure, against the priority of increasing trust and confidence in policing, to make sure that the use of such technology does increase trust and not decrease trust. And secondly, one of the issues we have in Dulwich Village is an increase in violent crime. Now, this is often recorded by the police, and I'll make sure I get my terminology right here, as theft, because rather than robbery, because the removal of the item, be it a mobile phone or a very expensive bicycle on its way to Herne Hill Velodrome, has happened before the threat of violence. And this seems to me like, and to many of my residents I represent, to be a bit of splitting of hairs. And what can we do to ensure that any crime that is committed with the threat of violence, either immediately before or immediately afterwards, is recorded as a robbery rather than as a theft? Thank you.
Okay, who wants to deal with that?
So if I take up live facial recognition first, yes, we've successfully deployed it on this borough a number of times. In fact, today it was deployed, wasn't it? Where was it?
Yeah, today it was deployed in Walworth, and there's probably a text message on my phone as I speak, giving me a latest update. But when I left it a few hours ago, we'd effected 6 arrests.
So it's a tactic that's encouraged by the Commissioner, by the Met. We haven't had, to my knowledge, any complaints from residents on the borough around the use of live facial recognition, and it's used in line with our processes through our live facial recognition team. There were some engagement events, were they, before we rolled it out on the
so we went. I think the first deployment was probably 18 months ago, something along those lines. So I was very aware of the impact that potentially it has, and we carried out some consultation and some engagement process prior to that. Not something which I'm going to continuously do. I appreciate there'd be people in the room who wouldn't have had that consultation, but it was certainly done before its first deployment. It's a fantastic piece of kit. It really, really is. If any of the board members would like to come see it in operation, drop me a quick one-line email, and I can arrange that for you. To give you peace of mind, the images are retained for such a brief moment in time. It is fractions of a second before they're then discarded. The only images that are held is if it's subjects that are wanted for a very strict criteria of offence, or they're either wanted for an offence or you're a registered sexual offender. If any of you want to come and see it, drop me a line.
Sorry, can I just confirm there? So we don't retain any images. What happens is, in the morning, it's uploaded with outstanding suspects for just the Met area. So outstanding, if you're wanted by the Met, wanted by the courts, or if you're a registered sex offender where you have specific orders, that's also uploaded. And then it's those people that are stopped. A, the people who are wanted, or B, if people who are subject to an order, just to ensure that they are in keeping with the order that's been set. But at the end of the day, all of that data goes, it's never retained. So it's uploaded, if it was in the morning here, it would be uploaded fresh in the morning, and then it would be deleted. So nothing is retained. just to confirm that. And then Jim, if I just walk around the death.
So, yeah, you are in very very broad terms. You described it very well. So your social acquaintance has obviously briefed you up well. So there is a really fine line between what would be classified as a robbery and what would be classified as a theft. In essence, it is the application of force to steal a property which makes it a robbery. And if I was to come and steal Emma's phone from her hand and there was no applied no force apart from that, that would be theft. But to give you some reassurance, we monitor both types of crime. We're not closed-minded to what those, in my I would call them theft person crimes would be. So they're not ignored within the patterns of behaviour that we would see. Each crime would be quality assured, so we would account. So if you were a victim of crime, an investigation would take place, the full facts would be established, and ultimately we would decide about what crime type it is. But you are right, sometimes the lines between the two are very, very slight, and it can very much depend on what information is gleaned, how it is reported.
I should clarify that the difference between robbery and theft came from your own officers in Dulwich Village, so your praise should be passed back to them for their high quality communication skills, so rather than my friend. The feedback from that then is we should be encouraging people to stress the level of violence used whenever they are reporting something. I would just go back to the other point on facial recognition. I'd be interested to learn what crimes or what type of suspect you're looking for. What are the criteria used for uploading these wanted people to?
But just on that, presumably there must be some sort of operational guidelines that are issued.
So I don't think either Emma or I would claim to be a subject matter expert on live facial recognition. There is a specific team that it is their day job. They can arrange future engagement events. I went into it with a very broad, open mind about what my viewpoint would be. When you listen to them and you talk about they talk about how passionate they are around the specific area of work and how strict the guidelines are and how successful it is. It really does very, very persuasive argument. Very, very persuasive argument. The bottom line for me is they're locking up and arresting some really dangerous individuals who are wanted for some really serious crimes, which otherwise would be very, very difficult to explore other tactical options to effect their arrests. Otherwise, we would have done that. When you look at the results, so when it got deployed in Brixton, within a couple of hours, we'd arrested 15 people in 3 hours or something along those lines. And there's some really serious offences in there for perpetrators who are out in the community, causing harm, causing violence. For all those incidents that you've talked about, we could probably do a checklist and they would be arrested for those offences. Sometimes these individuals are very, very difficult to find by other means, because otherwise we would have tried them and we would have done that and that wouldn't have been delivered. So this is another tactical option to help reduce violence crime within our communities, and it's done really, really successfully with a minimal amount of impact. Flip it over to talk about stop and search. Stop and search is very subjective. I might go out on patrol with Emma and decide to stop and search somebody, and Emma might look at it and think, oh, do you know what, you haven't got the grounds there. But that would be my view, that would be Emma's view. This is cold facts. This is individuals that are being picked up by technology, and there is a bona fide, undeniable reason to stop and interact with them and then carry out that investigation. And I'll say it again for the room. If you'd like to come and see it, please drop them on. I'd love it to show you. It's really.
I'm sure all members of the council would probably like to come down, but that's something we would probably take further. So that offer. So I've got Councillor Chamberlain next week.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions, both on increasing trust and confidence in police. One for the Cabinet member and one for the broader partnership. So, firstly, I'm sure the Cabinet member would agree with me that the scenes from Panorama were deeply distressing, and sort of they indicate that things have not improved for 2 years since the report. But would you also agree that the Met is broken as it currently stands, and that it's just not fit for purpose? That the report that we've just been shown shows that crime's up in our borough, the fear of crime is up in our borough, the trust in police is down, that police officers are now openly doubting victims, assaulting people in custody, calling for the deaths of immigrants. Meanwhile, you and Labour colleagues hold every lever of power of holding the Met to account and driving change. this council is responsible for standing up for our residents. We have a Labour mayor and police commissioner. We also now have a Labour Home Secretary that has responsibility for driving change in the Met. So I'd like to know what you're personally doing to deliver that change at every level. And then the broader question as well is, again, I struggle to see how we're going to increase local trust and confidence in the police whilst closing front counters. And we know now that the front counter at Woolworth Road police station is now under threat. We know that this is something that the Mayor of London was informed about in November of 2024. It's hard to understand how we build trust in the Met and or the police commissioner, the Mayor of London, when they're not being open with the public about the challenges that the police face. So I wonder if anyone would like to comment on the partnership about whether or not Woolworth Road Front Council will remain 24 hours a day, as the Mayor of London promised in the election just last year.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to, Natasha?
Oh my gosh, you didn't shock me by any of your questions. The key thing is the Met has faced challenges. It clearly is set out in the Casey review, and as a result of the Casey review, steps have been taken. So there's going to be a post-Casey review analysis, and the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has set that out in terms of the consultation. In regards to your second piece around the commissioner, sorry, not the commissioner, remind me of the first name. It's coming, it's coming. In regards to what you're saying about, what was your question? I've actually forgotten something. It's completely gone. You're going to have to.
So what is about whether or not you have confidence in the Met as it stands, and what you've done to personally engage and drive change at every level. The second question was about whether or not anyone on the partnership can commit to keeping Woolworth Road open 24 hours a day, as the Mayor promised last year in the election.
So in regards to the Met, I've clearly set out what the Casey review has said, and we stand by that the Met needs institutional change and cultural change, and the Met are working through that. So my response in regards to what Sadiq is doing with his team in regards to the post-Casey review stands, which is there will be a second analysis which will be taking place. Secondly,
do you have confidence and think that the Met is fit for purpose as it stands?
Let them answer the question.
So the key thing that I'm focusing on is the work that we have been doing with the Met. So we know, for example, tomorrow there will be question time at the Assembly, and they've asked for the Commissioner to come and speak about the work that they're doing and respond to the Panorama interview. Further to that, I can see that our London Assembly member, Marina Ahmed, has actively fought to ensure that vetting doesn't only take place at the start of a police officer's life, but actually during that process. And I think that these are really, really good ways to ensure that vetting is not limited or static, and to root out officers that are potentially not doing well. But the other thing I would like to point out is the Casey review was only 3 years ago. To effect institutional change, it's going to take time. Honestly, it genuinely will take time. I'm not going to sit here and say to you that I have 100% confidence in the police, but then I'm also not going to say to you that if there was a problem in any of our states, who's going to deal with that? When there are crimes taking place, the police are often running towards things that many people are running away from. So they do provide an effective service in terms of delivering. At the moment, we're looking at the crime stats. You talked about the crime stats going up. Actually, across London, the crime stats have been falling. And this has been a long-standing thing. It clearly sets out that crime stats have been decreasing. There are areas.
So there is now more data than it was last year.
Let her answer the question. You've had your time. Don't be quiet.
Sorry, the long-term trend across London is crime has fallen. I did also set out some of the caveats with some of this data in terms of making those comparisons. We have recently seen what appear to be some increases in some areas.
Okay.
And then there's a question about Walworth Road.
Is anybody here able to respond to that?
I'll respond to that. So it's really difficult. We're having to make some really tough choices, as you'll hear the commissioner talk about, the building a Met to meet the budget that we've got, and we're having to make some really difficult decisions around that. And as a result, as you're aware, there's conversations going on around the front counters, and as you'll have seen, some front counters will remain, some counters are being removed in total, and some front counters are being considered for reduced hours. And Walworth Police Station is being considered, is one that's being considered for reduced hours. That decision hasn't been made yet. There's still been engagement events. There was one today that you were at, Mr. Brockway, and then we will feed that back, and a decision will be made. But as I say, a decision hasn't been made, so we can't make any promises here from a policing perspective because a decision hasn't been made as of yet. But that's the situation that we find ourselves.
I'll just ask about, how does closing a front counter and people's access to the police help us to build trust and confidence and reducing the ability of the public being able to access?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. As I say, these are difficult decisions that we're having to make. But when they've reviewed front counter attendance, and especially overnight, I think it's something quite small, like 5 or 6%. Of reports are made during that time, which is why they're looking at reducing that facility. They are tough decisions that we're having to make. And I know that
So Councillor, the Walworth averages around about 6 crimes a day that are reported via its front counter. I admit that doesn't take into account every piece of transaction that comes to a front counter. They've developed a lot more function than that. And that's sometimes really difficult to measure, and to talk about the level of confidence is a really, really difficult thing to measure. There are a number of steps in place, though, to fill that gap, such as telephone reporting, online reporting, video reporting, the ability to make an online statement. And actually, when we look at it, the way that police stations were set up when I joined the organisation, spent a lot of lonely hours sat in the front counter. Even then, we've changed an awful lot since that time. To give you some reassurance, that I think that if Walworth, the option that is being considered for Walworth, certainly means it is open for the majority of what we would potentially call business hours, and the need where I think most of the community would look to access it. It is in the very, very small hours that potentially closes. But it's just to reassure you that decision hasn't been made. I had good attendance at a consultation meeting today. There's colleagues in the room who made their feelings very clear. It's all recorded, it's all minuted, it's all part of the transformation programme. So we'll all feed back to within that decision.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll move on now to Councillor Hicks, please.
Thank you. I had 2 questions, if I may, Chair. First is around, so Stephen, thank you. You talked a bit about cross-departmental working within the council with the housing department. That was going to be one of my questions, how are we tackling that from all viewpoints in terms of antisocial behaviour on our estates. I just wanted to pose the same question in terms of the rise in drug-related antisocial behaviour that we've seen, and what we're doing as a council, working across our public health department as well to tackle this. I'd appreciate some more information on that. And then my second question is, we've seen the theft against the person figures go up, I believe, reading this. So one thing that we see in our communities is the prevalence of illegal electric bikes and the associated risk of phone snatching that goes along with that, and also the risk that I think has come out in previous conversations with the fire service around the risk of charging batteries and scooters for batteries for scooters and bikes in people's homes. And just interested to know, what is the partnership doing with that issue in the round? What are we doing in terms of prevention and the fire risk, but also the risk of crime in light of these theft figures?
Okay, I'll bring the fire brigade in. That seems appropriate.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. I'm Dan Capon, so I'm the Borough Commander for Southwark, the London Fire Brigade. I've got my colleague. Unfortunately, we didn't introduce him at the beginning, but we started to go on a flow. So this is Tom Sharp, who's the station commander for Dockhead, which is one of our stations that sit within Southwark. So in relation to the lithium-ion batteries and charging, we have a thing called the Charge Safe campaign. So a lot of our engagement work is that comes into it. So recently we did an event at the Borough Market. We did an event at the London Bridge City, which was a water safety event, but at the same time we captured Charge Safe campaign. Have you seen it? Is that something people are aware of? Or no? Okay. It is out there. It's online, and like I say, I was going to go through some of our preventative work that sort of sits and impacts on the CSP, but I don't know if we're going to get the time. But we've got lots and lots of information. So yeah, for us, it's all about the Charge Safe campaign. We have seen a massive rise in issues with people seem to be adapting the e-bikes and e-scooters, using the internet for buying sort of maybe not official batteries, chargers. So for us, like I said, every event, anything we do within the community, we always come back around to the Charge Safe campaign. We also did a event which was it Walworth Road, where we got to where all the delivery drivers, the riders that are out and about. So again, we've been trying to campaign some of those areas as well. It links in with our home fire safety visits. So again, as the crews are going round, that's part of it. So when we're coming in, it used to be just coming around fitting a smoke alarm. Now it's a lot more about an educational piece. If crews are seeing it when they're going into homes, it's explaining the dangers, where not to leave them, what to do if you do find one. Like I said, it comes under our community engagement events. Also, we do fire safety checks and business engagement. So fire safety checks we identify areas across Southwark which are sort of shop and dwellings above, because again, we find that's where we're getting issues, because you're going to a shop and there'll be sort of one way up into a flat above. So again, for us, that's where that type of thing comes in. Public education and digital tools. So we've used a thing called now a fire safety checker. Again, I'm not sure if you're all aware. So it's an online service. So you can almost, if need be, you can run through some of the questions on there and it will also sort of see whether or not you need a home fire safety visit. If you get to it and you still feel uncomfortable, we would still come out. We are also youth and school engagement, again, because some of the young people are getting these scooters. We're finding that where they're sort of getting bashed around, especially the scooters, that's what's damaging the batteries, and then of course they're putting them on charge and having an issue with that. I'm probably going past what some of the questions you've asked. Does that cover what you were saying?
That's helpful. I'd be interested in broader piece as well across the services and how tackling that's part of the problem.
Yeah, so I'll let my colleagues be involved in a second, but it was just to say also, where we talk about the business engagement, we do work with the partner agencies. When we're identifying, we found one the other day, which was a repair shop, which was under some railway arches. And again, we can then bring our fire safety officers along, look at the legislation side to make sure that they're compliant and give some education at the same time.
Hi, did you want me to come in from a policing perspective? So we have specific operation that's currently running in relation to that we work alongside our traffic department that supports us around the two-wheeled, what we call two-wheeled enabled crime, which is that scooter sort of robbery problem that we've got. And we bid, and I've bid this today for extra resource to come onto the borough to address the issues that we've got. So we're not just from a borough perspective looking at it to address it. We've actually got additional policing resource from outside the borough to come in to help us with it as a problem. So that's from the policing perspective.
Okay, thanks. And I just wondered, Emma, did you want to come in on this item at all?
No.
Sorry, you're behind me. Online. You said no. Okay, all right.
No, nothing to add from
Okay.
me.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so LFB is also we've been doing quite a lot of work with some organisations. We partnered up with Deliveroo, who obviously are really big users of these e-bikes and e-scooters. We've also partnered up with Amazon, who are distributing these batteries and conversion kits. So the real preventative work is that we've been advising that they give out safety advice before the battery is actually purchased. So someone going online to buy these items is hit with safety advice, where to charge, when not to charge, don't leave them unattended, all those bits and pieces, rather than us going out and sort of finding the people who have got these. So yeah, we're doing all that sort of prevention work around it.
Okay. So Stephen. So Stephen,
Yeah,
Natasha.
I just wanted to, like, the purpose of us coming here is to really set out that community safety is everybody's business. So with the two-wheeled enabled bikes, it's an ongoing problem and we need to be able to tackle it, especially in the northern part of our borough where we're seeing phone-enabled snatches. And one of the great things that has been happening through increased reporting and focusing on our hotspot areas, there's a range of tactical operations that the police can use. So one is live facial recognition, the other is the types of projects that are being funded in those areas. And that is also the use of interceptors, which is a key way to be able to work in terms of stopping some of the activity that we're seeing with the two enabled thefts. I mean, at one of the meetings we had today, this is something that's come up. So it is being prioritised by the Met. The other thing that we're actually seeing is work that we're doing as a council with the bike companies. Initially, when I first learned about the bikes, we were being told that these bikes could be disabled, and that has never ever materialized. So there's a long-standing piece of work that we need to do, in terms of making sure that we're clear on the metrics that the police are collecting, in terms of how effective they are stopping crimes where people are using electric scooters and bikes, specifically with our phone snatches. And this is something that, you know, as a community safety partnership, we want to actually see a clear reduction in, and that's why we're seeing multiple resources and deployments being used. And then the second part is that piece about reporting in key areas. And obviously, you know, it's not ideal if you're a woman and it's late at night and you're walking through and then somebody just drives past you on the pavement on a bike that's moving really fast. It's quite daunting. So that's why we've increased the nighttime uniform patrol presence. But there's also that piece of work which I touched upon, which is the usage of drug. I know we have Darren here today. There's this whole piece of work that we do within the Combating Drugs Partnership, where we recognise that a lot of the crime in the borough is being driven by people that are afflicted with substance and alcohol misuse. So I think that this would be an area that would be useful to look into, because people are often committing crimes to feed habits in some instances. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, then it was just.
I'll just add a few things to that. We do work a lot with colleagues in health. We actually have a field diagnosis social workers in the South, particularly complex cases and drug-related issues. That's funded through part and on the Combating Drugs part. Mentioned. I co-chair that with the health. That was a specific acknowledgement that the centrality of drugs to this work. We work with CGL, Change Growth, and a substance misuse treatment provider to ensure that people can be in the service. So yeah, there's it's a tough area to work in. There's a lot to do, but it teams across the county.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abacha, please.
Thank you, Chair. Nice presentation and spread out. I know you've touched on my question already, but I'm still going to ask it. Given that Southwark is the largest social landlord in London, how is the council working with tenants and TRA to tackle ASB hotspots on estate? And are housing officers being trained and supported to identify and report early signs of domestic abuse, substance misuse?
Thank you. That's a really, really good question. There has been a tremendous amount of work that has taken place in regards to ASB on our estates, and also there's a piece of work that will continue looking at how we're responding to ASB that's taking place within our housing associations and owner occupiers. In regards to the work that's taken place between community safety and landlord services, at the start of the year, we have seen an increase in all our resident service officers undertaking training on domestic abuse, which has been signed off. We've also made sure that our resident service officers are aware of the stages by which they can actually escalate cases more quickly to our SASBU team. One of the key things that we've been able to agree with landlord services is to have a resident satisfaction survey. So if a resident reports ASB, what they should get is, by the time that case is closed, they should be able to report whether they feel that that situation has been dealt with satisfactorily. At the start of the commission, I spoke about having gone around and done a number of resident engagement pieces, often in TRA buildings. The work that we've been doing with our TRAs has been about making sure they understand the ways in which they can report, the differences between crime and ASB, but also talking more about community triggers. This is something that is underused in this council in particular, is if a resident, whether they're a housing association tenant or a council tenant, feels that they reported ASB and it hasn't been addressed, they can use this process to have an assessment of what's taken place. So there's been lots of fantastic work in this area. The other thing I'd like to call your attention to, at the start of the presentation, I talked about the pilots that we're running around ASB on our estates, and I talked about 3 areas being Brimington, Northland Estate and St Saviour's. So this is a piece of work that we're doing with public health, but it's really about understanding how we can effectively reduce drug usage in those areas, but support residents with their mental well-being and to create a sense of community resilience. In addition to that, there's the nighttime uniform presence who can be deployed. And the deployment is not only with the community safety team, but that's through that conversation with our partnership tasking group where operational decisions are made. And then the last thing I'd like to sort of round up on is this. Stephen touched on it when he talked about the underreporting. It's really, really important that we begin to sort of target areas where there are key issues. There's some parts of the borough, if you go and do a visual audit, you can visibly see things happening, but residents aren't reporting. So that's why I really want to emphasize that community safety is really everybody's business. If you happen to be going through an area and you see that there's a specific spot that has high levels of ASB, or you've got concerns, just report it, because maybe those residents don't know how to do that. So it's about just making sure we're putting out that message, that you're also following the community safety e-newsletter, which often gives updates about the work that we're doing. But last but not least, a key thing that we've changed has been around integrated enforcement. So Stephen touched on it in his presentation, but what it does mean is that we're actually deploying resources in those hotspot areas where we know there are activities going on. Similarly, the police are doing that with their resources as well. So in regards to your question, all of the above is being done. Thank you.
You, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I'd like to start just by acknowledging e-bikes, because I think that they get a lot of heat for good reason, but also that there is evidence and reports to suggest that actually e-bikes have helped women feel safer in cities like London. I can vouch for that, and I think the reports suggest that women will often use e-bikes to make their way home more directly, so that they're not having to walk 10 minutes from the bus or whatever it might be. So I just think it's important to acknowledge the positive side of that. My first question is around the community safety partnership. So I've been thinking, residents, they've heard of the police, they've heard of the council, they've heard of the fire brigade. Have they heard of the community safety partnership? I'm sure some have, but many wouldn't have done. So how will the CSP ensure better comms and engagement with residents? Because clearly it's doing good work, which could help restore some trust. And then my second question is on the trust piece. And I know we've already heard about the Panorama documentary, but I just kind of want to be realistic. I guess we've heard tonight that the Met is working on kind of implementing culture champions and workshops and training. And it's all good stuff. It just sounds very corporate when you think about residents and needing to feel trusting of the police again. And it kind of feels like some seismic counter campaign needs to take place, because often what's most difficult to change is the sentiment that people feel when there's this huge disconnect between what we're hearing and how residents feel. So is there anything like that up your sleeve that you can do, you know, like the campaign Southwark did, 1.7 million, it's good, right? So I'm just wondering along those lines. And then the final thing I'd just like to say is that as part of the Education and Local Economy Scrutiny Commission, we made a number of recommendations last year in the town centre action planning process around community safety, ASB and whatnot. And I guess it's the tale as old as time, really, in terms of council departments collaborating and how can you make sure that that happens better, because it often feels a bit frustrating when you get the report back and it's like, oh well, it's not our brief, so it's now going to go over there. So it'd be great to hear from you on that tonight as well.
I think the question on the community safety partnership is spot on, and that was the point of bringing it here. It was about making sure there's that visibility with the board, but it's about talking to residents about it. One of the things that residents often ask me, oh, we don't see any data. I'm like, it's there, it's in the community safety partnership. So in terms of the comms and engagement, we're working with our comms team to look at what branding we can put out to make sure that this information is delivered in bite sizes. And then the next stage of the conversation is, what conversations do the actual community want to have with this partnership, including the Met? Because it's all good us being here, but I think there's an opportunity for there to be a meeting in public where actually residents and stakeholders have an opportunity to hear from the Met and the partners what they're doing in these areas. So better comms, agreed. Making sure that we're talking to our residents. The last time we actually came to this commission, we spoke about this. So our commitment is, once we get the final version and we've got your recommendations, is to actually go to the public with this. But obviously we need to present the information in an infographic form and in a way that makes sense. As you know, we've launched the 10 neighbourhood areas, which means that we can talk about things in smaller geographical areas, because I think it's important that when we're talking about crime and ASB, that we're able to be specific to the areas that people are within. Yes, it's good to know the overall borough stats, but I think it being broken down in terms of geographical area will be of great benefit to residents. And this is something that, when we've done the policing oversight board, when people actually thought it was one of those sorts of meetings, we had a full room. You remember that, Jim? And it was a trying day, but the key thing is there is an appetite for residents across this borough to understand who the CSP is, what they do, and to have different types of engagement with the Met. So I hope that perhaps that could be a recommendation for today. In regards to the systematic campaign, come on.
I come back to the culture issue, and I get what you I take your point around it being a bit corporate, but the things that I spoke about earlier around like our culture board and our culture championship, that's something we're doing, and we'd already started doing a couple of months ago on the borough to understand if our issues, if we have an issue, what are they, understand how our staff feel, and also continue to work with our IAGs and the community to understand how the impact of what that will be on our communities. And you're absolutely right, it does then affect that trust and confidence, and then it makes us take a step back around all the good work that we're doing, as I said earlier, and which leads into the comms piece about your point of we're not great at then showing the good side and the good things that we're doing, things that we do every day. And we have brought in, I don't know if any of you hopefully you do know about Met Engage and signing up to Met Engage. Jim, do you want? I don't know what the uptake's been like in Southwark for Met Engage.
We're okay. never as good as we would like. So for those of you who don't know in the room, it's an electronic engagement process, which a number of constabularies have used. It's interactive. It enables users to highlight points of concern. I would kind of describe it as a really big ward panel. That's how I would describe it. Be able to highlight what you want police officers to work on within your ward. Then it's an engagement tool to try and get us to comes up with a quick Google search, and I would encourage you all to sign up to it. I would say Natasha is constantly challenging me on our joint com. We're not there, but we are better. We used to have our own communications department as a borough, but we don't have that anymore. So we do recognise that it is certainly internally it's a challenge for us to work on, and Natasha feeds back to me a lot that we're getting better.
I think the point about the no wrong door is so important. If a resident contacts one team, they shouldn't be pushed away. But that's about making sure that the teams actually understand what they're signposting to. So a lot of the work, as you know, there was an independent review that was commissioned in March. And what we've tried to do is solidify a lot of that work to make sure that if a resident calls up for ASB, for noise nuisance, and they go through to housing or a different team, that those teams know the right information to give the resident, but most importantly, to report it. And it's very frustrating when I've actually looked through correspondence from different residents and they're saying these things. But one of the things I can say for the teams that we have done some joint working with, landlord services in particular, public health, we're seeing a better joined up approach across the piece, but we didn't need to get to the point where we have one systemized approach. And it just means that our customer service operators are better trained to know where to signpost the information to. It does mean we need more concise information, but we also need to make sure the residents can still see us face to face.
If I could just perhaps add two very brief things. One, we're using our comms channels. Actually, a very resident. Secondly, on the town centre action plan, there's as you'll have seen, there's a safety objective of those, and there is there's a senior officer group. To bring community safety in.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. It's a bit hard asking questions fast because so many things have been asked and they've got more and more questions, but I'll try to keep it really brief. I think it's great that we've kind of got it's in here, there's more CCTV available to help maybe people feel a bit safe, but I suppose for me, I find it a bit difficult. I don't know if you see it as something that actually stops crimes happening, and I know we try to direct the police and neighbourhood watch people around to monitor areas, but my family's been quite recently impacted by robbery. Where you've got use of violence through phone theft in the local area, and I think the reporting issue is something that's really ringing true with me, Natasha, because when these young people were subject to the robbery that involved knives, all four of them didn't want to report it. They were all scared to report a crime that had happened that was very violent, because there was fear of retribution, there was a unwillingness to go and report stuff because they just wouldn't be seen or they don't think of that kind of person that's making those kind of reports. And how do we try to change that kind of narrative? So that was with younger people who are all in their teenagers, or four young men having fun out in Borough and Bankside as they should be doing. Unfortunately, we're on the wrong side of water, maybe, I don't know. Then last night on my way home, one of my local residents bumped into me and we've had a discussion, and she was talking about social behaviour where she lives. And I was saying to her, you really need to use reporting channels to report it back to the council. You know, we've got safe neighbourhood teams, got them things, and I know through our local board police officer, when I engage with them, they're very good in trying to make sure they fit hotspots we identify as part of their patrols. And I was expressing this to this resident. And her response was she's happy to do it, but she feels that she would potentially be labelled as someone that's always moaning, always making noise. She's the only person who's reporting it, and the neighbours aren't. So on the one hand, I'm trying to say, well, try to encourage a neighbour to do it, but she thinks she won't do it. On the other hand, I'm thinking, if she feels that the council thinks she's the only person making the report, then are the council taking her seriously? But how do we change our messaging to our residents to say, even though you might be the only person making these reports, we are listening, we are hearing, and we're responding to them in a way that it's known, so they know that that's happening back. So that was kind of that bit around the police and incident and social behaviour. But I wanted to jump back to the presentation quickly. Comment that you said about the women's safety survey, and with the 70.4% of women have reported experienced gender-based violence. So I've got 2 points on that. You said you was quite surprised by it. On the one hand, was a comment that it was so high that maybe reporting of gender-based violence that we see maybe doesn't corroborate with that, but in the survey women engaged more, so we saw that actually it happens more often. But then also, what do we define as gender-based violence in that survey? Is it does it include domestic violence, or is it a bit more specific? Takes away certain acts of violence. So you may not answer it now, but
I'm happy to come back with a bit more detail. It asks about all forms of gender-based violence, including domestic abuse. And I think what I actually said is it was shocking to see that number. I think there is underreporting there, and they need to be cautious in that if someone has experienced it, are they more likely to take a survey that's about that issue? But I wouldn't take that lightly. In terms of reporting and all concerned that we might not take that seriously, we take every report seriously. And of course, we end up as investigating things. There's no evidence that we can take any action on, but we investigate every report of ASB received.
just in terms of the investigate it all, so if there's direct follow-up, so every time someone gets someone back to them, say we've looked into it, because I think maybe that if that's happening, great, but if it's that maybe we're losing engagement with someone.
And I think that the key piece of the work that we've been working on with landlord services, is how do we actually report back to residents? So that's closing that resident feedback loop. And the issue in terms of one resident reporting, the key things that we're able to do is to carry out visual audits, to liaise with our cleaners that may have evidence of the ASB, and also there may be other people that are reporting from a different angle, because the resident may not know who's actually reporting. So this is why it's really important that we encourage residents to attend their TRA meetings, and it goes back to Suzanne's questions, how we are engaging those TRA chairs who may have more contact with the residents. And then the second point about making sure that we're doing a wider piece of engagement, so that when a resident does report, we're calling them up, because at the moment, one of the concerns that I've seen come up quite a bit for residents is when they report an issue to the an issue around drug usage or drug dealing, for example, they said that sometimes the police has turned up at their homes at times that the perpetrators are there. So that's a common one that I get. And then in regards to one person reporting, we can track who's reporting. And if we have concerns that it's malicious, we can liaise with them. But the key thing is that closing that feedback loop. So I do agree with you. And in regards to the young people, this is something that has really, really irked me for a while. It's really important that we work with our young people to understand how they feel about reporting crime and what works for them. So there's youth crime stoppers, which is called Fearless. This is something that we are promoting in the borough, but it doesn't have a big take up. Looking at other boroughs, they've got apps like Imabi, which is something that they've worked with young people on to see how accessible it is. But at the moment, we're piloting Met Engage. this thing about retribution is something serious because it indicates that the person that is robbing them is known to them. Oh, yeah, that's interesting because some of the key things that I've definitely been advocating for is making sure that we're having those conversations with young people and they know how to report in safe ways. So apps like Fearless, looking at what Barking and Dagenham has been doing with an app like Imabi, but also the work that our VCSs do. We, under the Southwark Violence Reduction Unit, we have a consortium called MyEnds, and it's about strengthening that work to make sure they actually do some of this engagement, because when we try to do it ourselves, young people just... But it is really sad that young people experience crimes and don't feel safe reporting. So if you looked at the first wave of the Resident Insight Survey, young people appear to be desensitised to crime in ASB and also our Black communities.
I've got Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a couple of questions that follow on from some of the things that we've already heard. So in terms of, for Stephen really, when we've got ASB on estates and you've said that we are taking action, do we know how many times that action has been taken? Is it, is it something that we can be saying to residents who then do have the confidence to come and report that, ASB or drug use or whatever it is, they have the confidence because they know that action is going to be taken? If we can point to 16 cases in Rotherhithe where someone has been, their tenancy has been terminated because they have been acting unlawfully or in a way that warrants that action. So that's my first question. My second question is on the Rotherhithe police station. Sorry. We have a petition now that's been signed by 1,000 residents local to Rotherhithe who are asking for the police hub to be reinstated in the local area. We've, Stephanie and I have worked with British Land to identify a place for that in Surrey Quay Shopping Centre. I just think it's a really easy win for the police to rebuild some of that trust that's been lost by when we lost the Rotherhithe hub in the old leisure centre. I understand, the financial pressures that you are under, and it speaks to Victor's point about, Walworth Road. But I do think that this is such an easy win. It's such a high footfall area. It would be so visible to local residents, and it would just go some way to rebuilding that trust and confidence that the local community have. And if I may, Chair, sorry, a third question. So obviously, we have a slight problem with phone snatching, and I've brought in gone over the e-bike question about that, but I wanted more to point out about yesterday's news of the smashing of this phone smuggling gang and what effect we actually think that will have for our residents, for people immediately. You can sit outside a pub on Tooley Street and watch 3 phones get nicked out of someone's hand, as we all did a couple of weeks ago. Do we think that is going to have is it going to be, tomorrow there's going to be no phone snatching in Tooley Street? It's not something that I am expecting you to say, but do we think that will have an effect? Thanks.
I'll pick up the first of those questions about, because it's a really well-made point that if people don't know what we're doing about things, then they are less confident, trusting, they're less to support. we have ramped up the comms, and obviously there are some things we need to be careful about communicating stuff, identify people. However, we are trying more than ever before to get those stories out about we did this, you said this, we did this, and this was the outcome of a piece of action. And I mentioned the everything report. There's communication. There's more communication to come to residents and others about the work that we're doing there.
Shall I come in with Rotherhithe? So I hear you, and yes, it's disappointing that we've had to move out, and obviously we've been over that issue, and we are where we are. However, we're committed to working hard with Southwark Council to find a suitable location. Unfortunately, the shopping centre wasn't suitable for a number of reasons. However, recently, Stephen and I have both visited a property which we are looking at. I can't make any promises, but we are looking at it. We've been to see it, and we will update you as that progresses. In relation to the phone snatches, I wish I could say that tomorrow there's not going to be any. I really do. However, going back to the operation, I'm hopeful that it will have an effect in the area. Obviously, until we see how that progresses, I wouldn't be able to say too much here in the room today about it, but I'm hoping that it will have an impact locally. But we're still committed to addressing that issue, and we recognise that it is a significant issue for the borough, and we are working really hard. It's one of our top priorities on the borough to address that. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got a question. I think it's probably in relation to the probation side. It's just that I know lots of people have expressed their concerns about the early release from custody reform, which has come into place, and how that's impacted on the borough, and how that sort of works out in practice. So I don't know if somebody could talk about that at all.
Yeah,
please.
I can. Can you hear me?
Are you loud and clear?
Yeah. So I'm Emma Connor, Head of Service for Southwark Probation Delivery Unit. So in essence, every individual that's released from prison is subject to stringent licence conditions and a robust risk management plan, which is put together by the probation officer who's supervising that individual. So in terms of early release, the pre-release work that is done for any individual being released from custody remains the same. So anybody that's been released, that risk management plan and the sentence planning and the conversations with statutory agencies in housing and drugs and alcohol, etc., all those referrals are still all made. So everybody being released, whether it's early or at their conditional release date, is still subject to the same conditions and the same plans. I think in relation to the impact it's had on Southwark particularly, our numbers are low. We haven't seen a significant number of people being released early. Maybe, I think over the last 6 months, we've had maybe 5 or 6 individuals that have been released earlier than planned, but all have been released with stringent licence conditions and robust risk management plans in place prior to release.
Okay, thank you very much. That's good to know. Thank you. Are there any further questions before we close the item? No. I mean, I wanted obviously to thank you all for coming this evening and for the comments that you've made in response to members' questions. But I'd like to go back to an earlier point that Natasha raised at the beginning, in the sense that, even if we're all dysfunctional bodies and we weren't here, crime would still happen. And so therefore, we do have a common vested interest in ensuring that the residents of this borough are kept safe, and guaranteeing that we do have law and order on our streets. So, we all, organisations do go awry from time to time, but that's the key objective. And we all want to rebuild confidence and trust in our organisations, and especially the police, because we rely on you so much to keep us safe. And we've heard the various things that you've talked about this evening. So we're literally in it together, and that's how it will remain. And we'll do everything to ensure that this partnership is successful in every aspect of its work. So thank you once again for. Thank you. I'm going to take a 10-minute break before we come on to the next item. Thank you. Meeting, please. The next item is item 6, which is Chiltern Grove Estate, infill and major works. I know that we've got the ward councillor here, Councillor Cryan. We've also got the strategic director. We've got the director for repairs and maintenance. Is anybody else here for this item? Oh, Councillor C2, sorry. And oh yes, of course you are. Yes, of course, yes. Sorry. Okay, would you want to all come up to the table, please, and just introduce yourselves formally on the microphone? Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'll take Councillor Cryan first. Sorry. Yeah. So if you just state who you are for the record.
Yeah, I'm Councillor Stephanie Cryan. I'm one of the ward councillors in where Chiltern Grove is. So, first of all, Chair, I just thank you for Chiltern Grove. I have been in touch with some of the residents on Chiltern Grove, so I will be talking through some of the things they want me to ask as I go through this. I think really, though, it's really helpful to give some of the history on this, which was in the report as well. So originally, this was a build-on-top rooftop home with some infill sites, and the idea at the time was that major works would be done at the same time in conjunction with it. Around that, I think the difference on this one was it was the test case. It was the first rooftop homes that was actually granted planning permission, and unlike future potential rooftop homes that were being explored, this wasn't modular where you'd have a modular building and then it would be put on top. This was a fully built on top whilst residents were still in situ type of build, which was quite problematic around that. I think it would be more intrusive than modular. Which we'd said at the time, but I think NG, who were the contractor, said they'd had experience of it, and therefore they had sort of experience in dealing with that. There are numerous problems in securing building control consent for it. I had major concerns, and my colleagues at the time was Councillor Williams and Councillor Whittam, and then obviously Councillor Roberts, had major concerns about that, about the capacity of building control. Building control just weren't getting back with any of the information, and they'd request more information, time frames for when they would come back to say whether it was suitable or not lapse. We would go to resident project group meetings on a monthly basis, and each month there would not be an update from building control. They missed their deadlines around that. And it became very clear that building control just did not have the capacity to deal with this, and they then went to a third party structural engineer surveyor to actually look at that. And it sort of muddied the water a bit. I'm glad to say that actually building control, those individuals are no longer with the council. It was really obtrusive and it really delayed things. And obviously the major works parts that could be done, which were going to be facilitated as part of the major works, were done, but nothing could progress until the decisions from building control around that. But that said, I think there were also problems with NG at the very beginning. So when the works, when they first started on site, they cut down a tree which shouldn't have been cut down. They started to use residents' car parking spaces as well. And actually at the first meeting, when we were talking about the window installation, this isn't like, don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about the window installation itself, but when they were talking about it, and residents were asking about respite centre, and they were asking about why this time frame around that, the site surveyor from Orange was extremely rude, to expect that myself and Councillor Williams had to pull him up, and he was removed from the site because he just didn't have the skills needed to deal with residents. That did resolve itself. It did resolve itself, and I think the liaison after that did get better. There was also COVID and the delays of COVID, which meant the scaffolding was up longer, and obviously post-COVID, works were slower because of the fact of the need for social isolation and social distancing, I mean, for operatives around that. So that did have an impact around this as well. I just want to note that this actually was led by the New Homes team. It wasn't led by the what was then asset management, the major works team. It was solely a New Homes team led one. It only passed it over to asset management once the decision not to build rooftop homes was made and not to proceed with the new home extension. So this was a lot different to other major work projects in the fact that it wasn't led by major works, led by the New Homes team, which I think is really important to state, albeit that for residents it's been a really rough time for them around that. There's been regular project group meetings that we've attended as ward councillors since the inset of this, which have been led by open communities, which I think have worked well. They're really good. And I think open communities have worked really well to allow us as ward councillors and for residents to hold the council to account on this as well, and actually work as a resident's friend around this. I think being run by open communities has really helped the process, helped secure that. So it's not the council running them around that. There's also, which isn't actually mentioned in the in the reports, but there was an independent report commissioned by Airy Miller to look at the process around that. About it was a couple of years ago now. It actually was when Neil Purvis was still with Open Committees. I can't remember how long ago it retired around that. But one of the things that Airy Miller highlighted is that, and quite rightly, some of the things we were asking around this was that actually this was agreed under a partnership agreement. So though it was done by NG, it didn't go out to tender. It was done because they could do the major works as well. And Airy Miller quite rightly pointed out actually we really should have, or council should have considered going for a tendering process for it rather than just doing it as a package that NG had presented around that. And I do wonder if that had happened, whether the actual modular build might have been introduced. I mean, it did finally work out that actually there was the homes could take the structural load. There were concerns because it was built on the Thames foreshore as well, which was an added complication around that as well. So when it was agreed not to proceed with rooftop homes, and when it was decided that the two small side extensions for infill weren't going to go ahead, it then became a major works programme. And obviously there are other works that would need to be done, which were part of the local offer, so-called local offer for new homes such as the roof and cladding and things like that. NG re-tendered for it, but I mean, I've been at virtually every project group meeting, and the price would not have added value for money, and it would have added to leaseholders on that. That said, I do think that we do need to look at where leaseholders are on this, and some of the things that weren't going to be charged to leaseholders and are going to be recharged, we should seriously reconsider around this. For example, as part of a new homes, there was going to be all new landscaping. If this had been just a major works project, there wouldn't have been landscaping because nothing would have been done to the communal areas, the communal grass areas there as well. So I do feel that things like the communal landscaping, the roofing, we do need to consider that we don't recharge leaseholders for that as well. And we do need to absolutely look at that impact on leaseholders. One of the things that's become really clear is there's been a lot of antisocial behaviour, sort of tying in with the last item, a lot of and some criminality around that. We've had instances where empty flats have been squatted by criminal gangs, which isn't just unique to Chiltern Grove, but it is really worrying. I think the look and feel of the estate that Horned up has helped contribute to that. In fact, last year, Councillor Roberts and I were door knocking on the estate, and there was a gang out there, and we felt intimidated. But we knocked on one door, and the door was half open, and no one was inside. And it turned out that was one of the flats that they'd squatted around that. And we reported that to the police. And I have to say, I wish the police were still here, because the police came back to us with an email saying, "Oh, our inspector has said this isn't an issue for the police, it's an issue for the council," when it was quite clear it was criminality, it was gang activity. And it was really, really frightening for the residents, really, really frightening for them as well. The police did finally get involved. Notice was put on those flats, and the void's been turned around now in Chiltern Road in general. And we've had issues with, concerns from people in the Sutton dwelling homes in Chiltern Grove, which aren't council home. We know where it emanates from. It's from another block, which is a housing association block. They've not really done what they should be doing in terms of their tenancy checks and tenancy agreements around that as well. But I think that this is all compounded in what's been happening on Chiltern Grove over the last. So there was a commitment as part of the build on top and the side extensions that secure entry doors would be put to the building, and residents overwhelmingly said they wanted that around that. It then turned out, because these were going to be provided as part of the new builds, again, if they were to be provided, they would be charged as leaseholders. So I think myself, Councillor Roberts and Councillor Whittam felt that was totally unfair. So we've allocated £210,000 of neighbourhood seal for those secure doors, one, so that leaseholders don't have to get charged for it, but also it saves money on the HRA, because we know where the HRA is as well. So actually we are providing that funding for it, and I know that can go ahead prior to any additional works on that. There was a recent ballot on the estate for that, and overwhelmingly, I think around 8 households either said no or didn't respond. Every other resident overwhelmingly said yes, which we were really pleased about that secure entry door. So at least we can get that gain for residents without any additional cost to them on that as well. In terms of where we are next, obviously the major works do have to be re-tendered out, because the Equans offer, we wouldn't have accepted it as Will Council. It was just too expensive, and the cost borne by residents would be excessive, and we just wouldn't stand for that. So we've welcomed the fact that there's now going to be a resident rep on the panel considering the tender bid, so there will be a resident voice in that. I think that's a big step forward that's been pushed for, and actually it's been welcomed by residents in that respect. Residents have asked me though to raise the following. So there was going to be a resident project group meeting this evening that's been cancelled for next week, but residents have got in touch with me with some of the issues that they would like raised around it. They do feel that there has been reneging on previous promises to not recharge roof and cladding back to leaseholders and the landscaping, and I think there needs to be clarity around that. And I do feel that given what's been happening here and the length of time it's taken, albeit that it was part of the new homes that's not going ahead now. We do seriously need to look at that for residents. There is compensation that's been offered, so we did fight for that, and residents fought strongly with that, and we as well councillors absolutely advocate for that. That's estimated to be £4,600 per property, but residents are not sure how that was arrived at. Why is it a flat rate? Should there be different rates depending on the level of disruption? Depend on each individual household around that, and done on a case-by-case basis and consider there, which we would as ward councils also advocate for as well. And also the original work schedule didn't refer to separate phases, so residents want to question is the legality of that. Obviously there are reasons why, but the legality of that and why it didn't go out to the tendering process originally, and why it was done as sort of in the partnership project, which is really unusual for new homes, because new homes it does go out to tender around that as well. What the last thing I want to say is that obviously as a committee you will decide where this goes next, and I just want you to, and I'm sure everyone on this committee knows that we have secured a commitment as ward councillors to come back to cabinet. So within the recent Housing Scrutiny Commission report that Councillor Cherry allowed us to on Canada Estate and Devon Mansions, we have put a recommendation in there, which is recommendation 13, which says that the learning from the Canada Estate be applied to the upcoming major works at Chiltern Grove to ensure high standards of contract management and that that value for money is achieved. And the rationale for that is that Chiltern Grove is the next major project taking place in Rotherhithe, so this will be a good opportunity for the council to show that they are implementing the ward member recommendations from the task force report on Canada Estate and around that. So we've already secured a commitment which will be coming back to Cabinet in December. So Cabinet are going to be looking at this as well, and I think that's right and proper that they do that as well. But I just want to finish by saying, the residents on Chiltern Grove have been absolutely amazing. They've really been absolutely amazing and really quite stoic actually whilst this has been going on. It's been a stop-start for them. There are parts of there are some improvements that have been done. You can see those improvements. It isn't the finished article yet, and it still isn't the finished article. And even when the final works start and there's a provider, a company in place, a contractor in place to deliver them, it's still not going to happen overnight. It's still going to be a good 18 months to 2 years before the estate is actually up to where it should be. And I do think that should be recognised, that they've been absolutely amazing in that. I think their commitments come to resident project groups have been really great, and those resident project groups, as we all know in our own wards, after a while some of them can die a death and people don't turn up, and these ones people have always turned up. Around that, they've been active, they've been engaged, they've been constructive as well in this. I have to say also the council have listened a lot to some of what has been said around that, but this has been just so complex with many different parts around it, and it's sometimes to try and unpick it all. So some of it will relate to home ownership unit and around service like the section 20 notices. Some of it relates to works that were promised part of the new homes, and then some of it relates to just the normal major works bit. And it has been really hard to untangle some of that within that, but throughout it all I think residents have absolutely maintained their integrity throughout this. I think they've been absolutely great, and it's and I think as ward councillors we have worked with them to make sure that what they need and what they want is, we have been challenging officers at those meetings around that. I think having open communities there allows that challenge, and it allows that accountability for the council around it as well. So I just want you to think it has been hard.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'll bring the officers up next before we open up to questions. Thank you very much. So, and Councillor C2 as well, if you want to come forward, please. So for the record, if you just state your names and position, and then we listen to you then.
Councillor Michael Shitty, cabinet members for Councillor.
Hakim Oshinake, Strategic Director Housing. Richard Ndidi, Head of Investment. Paul Murphy, Interim Design and Delivery Manager. Ryan Collingwood, Director of Repairs and Maintenance.
Thank you. And who's going to lead on this? Michael?
I'm going to start with a very brief introduction, and officers will take us through the internal review itself. I mean, the first thing to say is sorry to the residents who were in the building itself. I think that if you're a resident living in the building and if you've had to experience the number of years where not only the fact that you were living on the building site, but you weren't absolutely sure when things will be resolved, that would have caused a lot of anxiety and distress to residents itself. I think from my perspective, I think the key thing is how do we ensure that we learn from this? How do we ensure that this doesn't happen again? Councillor Cryan has rightly set out the history of it, the background of it itself, and officers will touch more upon it. What I can reassure councillors here and the committee members here today is that there are three ways in which I'm fairly confident that we're learning from this and that it's very unlikely that we will find ourselves in this position in the future. Firstly, in addition to the reviews that have already been carried out, Hakim and I have been very clear that we wanted to make sure that there is reviews carried out of all major works of recent going back to us, going far back to 2015, and to make sure that we not only learn from the major works that review has been carried out already. We know about the Canada Estates, we know about the Mansion, Fairviews, and Kirby Estate itself. But it's important that we learn lessons where we can learn from, and it's important that when those lessons have been learned, including one for Shilton Grove, that we apply it to our major works, process and procedures, and strategy going forward. So that will be the case. It's also important that we ensure that as part of what we want to do going forward in relation to Children Growth, that we ensure that that we have an accountable process there. And as Councillor Cryan has stated, we'll be coming back to Cabinet in relation to how we're progressing, and certainly we would be happy to go back to Cabinet going forward to ensure that we carry on with that update. And lastly, but most importantly, is making sure that all throughout this, that we still maintain residents' kind of involvement and make sure that residents are kept up to date. I think in this whole episode, with all the things that have gone wrong, actually one of the things that remain throughout the period is the resident project team and having the regular meeting, and that stayed the case itself. And we certainly, I attended the resident project meeting that has occurred since I've taken on the role, and I'm committing to continue to do so. And I know officers are committing to do so, and I thank the ward councillors for continuing to supporting residents through that process itself. And I think residents do appreciate that, and we will continue to do so. So just to conclude, there are lessons that we've learned from this, and certainly the commitment is to ensuring that going forward, lessons in terms of making sure that when we are considering kind of tendering or looking for partners to deliver projects, that we look at the appropriateness of it, we ensure the decision makings are swift, and we ensure that actually the progress is made in relation to works itself. So I'll now hand over to officers to take us through.
Thank you, Councillor Shitty. Councillor Cryan really did sum up what happened at Chilton Grove quite well. And just to cover off some of the points, so this was a new homes project originally, and the partnering contract probably wasn't suitable for these type of complex works. As we know, it was for rooftop homes, and we done it on a normal partnering major works contract. There was issues with building control approvals. There was also an issue, the COVID-19 was happening at roughly the same time, which also caused some delays. There was slow decisions being made on the cladding and other scope changes. And when the contractor left site in 2021, I believe, they left the site in a state, and it was a very bad experience for our residents. And the fact that the contractor left site meant we had to abandon the rooftop homes and also the corner home extensions that we planned to do. The original offer to leaseholders that we wouldn't pay for they wouldn't have to pay for the rooftop works and the cladding and lift replacement landscaping was all part of it being included in the new homes rooftop development. So since that didn't go ahead, the views and the position actually changed on the charging. We have agreed to give residents £4,600 compensation, and that's based on our internal compensation procedure. So I think we are in a position that that's the offer that we're making. If residents do feel that the offer is not appropriate, we'll be happy to discuss that with individual residents. There are some works that will be going ahead that we would have done anyway for major works, which will be the roof covering and some of the cladding, some concrete repairs, lighting repairs, and some landscaping. That's likely to go live or start in January, February 2026. And again, as I said, that's roof repairs and cladding. We're also doing a door entry system that is going to be SIL funded, and that should be completed by the end of 2025.
Anybody else? No? Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Roberts and Councillor Champion.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to echo what Stephanie said about the attitude and what the residents have been through, but also, I mean, like, I'm not sure that I would have been quite as patient with Southwark Council as they have been. You know, coming into this as a new councillor a few years ago, even I began to feel like I was, stuck in a Groundhog Day with the meetings where we were having the same meeting. I do recognise that things have progressed, since we've had a new team, and I do think that things are going in the right direction. But I do want to know more about how we're going to communicate with all of the residents there. We do have the really good residents panel, but actually it's not all residents, obviously. So I want to know what work we're doing to get more residents engaged, make sure that people know what's coming down the line, and just to keep an eye on things like the antisocial behaviour before the doors go in, and what we can do as ward councillors, but also what we can do as a council to help them through this, what's been a pretty testing time for a lot of people.
Thank you for a very, very good question. As Councillor Cryan articulated earlier, that we have continued the RPG meeting duration of this process. They're very, obviously from an officer perspective, very difficult meetings. And I say in the body of the report, you'll hear me say that they've been quite difficult and challenging for officers as well. Some of whom, most of them, have been blameless in this process. But in terms of going forward, we had a conversation with councillors just recently. One thing we stopped doing a little while ago was the resident newsletter, and we've agreed with the councillors that we will reinstate the resident newsletter, and I'm expecting the first reinstated letter will go out at the end of this month, and then we'll continue to do that on a monthly basis going forward to keep residents involved in what's happening. There is a lot to explain to them in the first meeting because a lot of time has lapsed in the last newsletter, so we're expecting the first one to be full. We will run that by local councillors just to make sure they're happy with the content of that, so they can kind of test the water for us. It's absolutely imperative that we get the residents back on our side. At the moment, the RPG is predominantly leaseholder led, more leaseholders and tenants on there. But as we move forward, we'll be encouraging through our normal communication processes through the major works, we'll be encouraging more residents, particularly targeting tenants, to join us on those panels to help us to get through, to rebuild the trust in the council, to rebuild the trust in the major works project itself. Most importantly, to get those outstanding works completed, because they've been a long, long time outstanding. So, very valid question. We'll be working hard to get the residents back on our side. I'm trying to turn the corner with them, and I do have to echo what councillors have said. Despite, and the report does set out the resident experience, and I hope members will appreciate that that's the way I set it out, and it comes across probably not as bad as it, probably not as bad as it should have been portrayed, but I think it's a fair reflection. We need to turn that corner, and we need to rebuild the trust, and we need to avoid making similar mistakes. I think the important point that Councillor Crime made earlier, this was a complex project. Initially, when we started off, the idea of combining the QVIP works with the new build made absolute sense. Using a partnering contract, less so, and that proved to be the case, but the intentions were very valid at the time. But in the end, it proved to be more complex than any of us actually anticipated. So resident communication, resident engagement and involvement is one of our key targets. We will make sure that we do it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions. One about sort of next steps and the culture in the council, and one for the cabinet member around lessons learned. So, you know, listening to you all trying to provide assurance, it does sort of sound as if this situation is now in hand and resolved. I think the reality, having spoken to lots of the residents on the estate, is that nobody feels any confidence that they have, you know, an assurance about which direction it's going. You know, residents are feeling stuck. Some people are, you know, unable to sell their flats, to rent their flats out of market rent. You know, they're not being listened to. I believe there was a meeting in September of 2024. I know, Hakeem, that you were there. You know, someone described that to me this morning as a dreadful meeting, one where there was no humility from the council. It was very casual about the way that the council approached that. The residents were told in that meeting that they could face an additional £60,000 on top of £40,000 some residents have already paid. And that's a 91-year-old resident that's lived there her whole life since the estate was built. That, imagine how terrified that 91-year-old must be to find that she potentially owes 100 grand. And that's just been left in the ether. That was September of last year, and she doesn't know what the next steps are going to look like. So I think there's a really serious cultural issue here too about not only do we not know, we're not communicating what next steps are to residents, but also that the council is systemically coming up with these issues. You know, we've had Canada Estate, Devon Mansions, Kirby Estate, Arica House, Consort Estate, now Chiltern Grove. The list just seems to be systemic and endless about a culture and a department that doesn't seem to be able to get on top of these issues. And it's always left to residents to do the digging and opposition councillors to try and challenge the council to do better. So when are we ever going to start seeing a cultural shift where this is actually going to get better in the council, and have confidence that the council does deal with that in a way that residents can trust? And a question for you, Councillor Shitu. So there's concerns as well about why this contract was awarded without proper scrutiny or a competitive tender in the first place. So from your understanding, what mechanisms are now in place to ensure that the awarding of contracts through the back door can't happen again? And what will you be doing differently to the 6 cabinet members in as many years that have failed to do something in your role before now?
Yeah. So thank you, Councillor Chamberlain. If I start with the first question, always a good place to start. You're right. I attended a meeting in September 2024. If I recall correctly, one of the first things I said to residents at that meeting was an apology about the way that things have been carried out on that estate. I had prior to that meeting, and not because of that meeting, I had visited that estate, and I was disgusted by what I saw. I wrote to the ward members to apologize straight away and made promises about amendments that would be made. And those amendments have been made and continue to be made. The reality is works were carried out, and leaseholders rightly were charged for those works. But as you know, the way we charge leaseholders is based initially on an estimate, and they start paying until the works are done. Leaseholders have received a final bill for those works that were completed, And because not all of the works that were promised were completed, they have had refunds. But works are still needed because some of the things we said we would do, we haven't done. It's a different type of scheme at the moment because it was originally based on, an extension sideways, an extension on the rooftop. Now it's a standalone refurb, which the council is used to doing on any estate. So they will be receiving a bill for that once that procurement is completed. But it's also been said at this meeting, that we have carried on having meetings with residents. What councillors have testified to that, officers who attended have testified to that. So I am surprised to hear that there are residents who don't know what the next steps are. But that is not to say everybody automatically would know because of those meetings, which is why we're restarting the newsletter. The reality is all of these schemes mentioned by Councillor Chamberlain that this commission is very much aware of. Chilton Grove that we're talking about today, Canada Estate, Kirby Estate, Devon Mansions, all of those schemes happened around the same time, around between 2020 and 2022. In fact, some of them started before that, around COVID-19. It's not an excuse, but the point is they are all historical. That is not the way we do things in housing now. Every time I have come before you as a commission, I have been transparent. I have been open about the work we do. I have been open about the mistakes that have been made in the past, and I have been clear on the steps that we're taking to address them. We have made promises to you. The recommendations that you've made, we've accepted in full each time, and officers have gone away, and we have been taking those actions to make sure that what residents have experienced on this estate, they never have to experience them again. They are not pleasant. I'm not sitting here excusing any of them at all. In fact, it's embarrassing for me that I have to come here each time and talk about the same thing. So it is important that I never have to do it again. And I promise you, as I have done before, that we're taking the right steps. Mistakes will always be made because we're human beings, but they should never be at the extent of the mistakes that have been made on this estate. Thank you.
Councillor Chamberlain, you asked me questions about what confidence should you have in the service going forward, and what will I do kind of differently to my predecessors itself. Look, when you come into a role, you kind of try to get a sense of idea of what is going on. You try to understand where things are. I think you'll probably agree with me that coming into the role itself means that I've had to kind of get to grips with a difficult place in which housing has found itself. But for me, I think the key thing is understanding what tools do I have within my armory in order to ensure myself that the department and the services is going in the right direction. So as I stated earlier on, one of the things that is reassuring me is because I know that the services are going through every single major works at the moment and trying to understand where we are, whether there are any issues, and also if there are any issues, bringing that to my attention to see what needs to be done itself. And I'm also reassured because nothing of recent has come up itself. So if there has been something in the last few months, I'll be more concerned than perhaps I'm concerned at the moment. And in terms of the question of what would I do differently itself, I think I'm reassured by the fact that there are processes and procedures in place. There is the good landlord plan, which Councillor, the leader, Councillor Sarah King, kind of led before I took on the role itself. And one of the key things I've said to Akeem and the team is that the good landlord plan will be at the center of what we do and would need to be constantly reviewed to make sure that we're held to account, to make sure the department as a whole can restore the confidence in which our residents should have. And I think the second thing is also that I know some of the criticism, and to a smaller extent in Chilton Grove, is the fact that perhaps we haven't responded as services well to residents' concern and councillors' concern when issues are brought on at an early stage itself. And my commitment has been very clear since I've taken on the role that I would make sure that I'm where I need to be, listening to residents and ensuring that whatever the concern is, that I do take it very seriously. Some concerns may end up not being what it is, but residents are right to raise those questions itself. And some of those I've already taken on board, and some of those will continue to be the case. So certainly what you can expect from me is the fact that I will take every concern very seriously, and I'll make sure that I'm at the front line. And I think the last part, which is probably more something personal to me, is making sure that I have as much in-depth and greater understanding of what my officers do. I can only properly hold them to account by making sure that I have as much. I cannot be an expert as they are, but I think the greater understanding that I can have of what they do, the better I can be placed. And that's why I'm making sure that I'm on our estate walkabout. I'm ensuring that I'm at our repairs action day. I'm ensuring that I'm dropping in to some of our key housing services to make sure that I observe what they do. And that will continue to be the case. So I hope that reassures you, but I appreciate that only the future will tell.
Thank you.
Just wanted to add on the procurement, because you specifically mentioned procurement. To be clear and for the records, the decision for Equans to do this work was not a procurement through the back door. The council was in contract with Equans for refurbishment as part of the QWHIP program. The error was that, as this is a building scheme rather than a refurb scheme, perhaps a different route should have been taken, because Equans, it should have been identified that Equans would not have the expertise to do a building program, as their expertise was in a refurb program. So, a decision should have been made that even though we had a contract with them for refurbishment, this should have been done differently.
Well, just a second, Councillor Crine.
To add, I was at that meeting as well on the 20th of September, and there was shock when figures were, and I do know residents. I think the issue is the meetings used to be hybrid, and so they'd be held in Rotherham Community Hall, and there'd be residents who can't go online who would attend the meeting, and then there would be. I think the issue was that the actual tech in the hall wasn't set up, so it ended up everyone huddled around the laptop. The leasehold, and it got a little bit sort of chaotic. Like, the meetings themselves aren't run by the council; they're run by open communities, and open communities decision fine. I think that was a wrong decision because then residents like the resident you mentioned, Councillor Chamberlain, and other residents, as a tenant that we know who used to attend all of them, can't go online. It does exclude those, and I do think one of the things the council does need to do is try and push open communities to find some sort of hybrid solution. We've in the past as well, council secured drop-in sessions when things have been happening as well that residents can go to. And I really feel strongly that, and so does Councillor Roberts and Councillor Whitt, feel really, really strongly that before any major works are started, the next phase is started, that actually more drop-ins are held so that those residents who haven't or can't go to the meetings either online or in person, there's that opportunity there. As we used to do years ago with major works projects, you'd have a team sit in the halls, you'd have homeowner services, you'd have someone there to be able, so people could direct their questions to the right people there as well. And I think actually there is a lot of value in bringing something like that again. So I do hope that for this scheme, when the contract is awarded, that actually the contractors are there. There are several drop-ins. That because at the moment, and these open communities, they do a really good, but it does exclude those.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that comment that I think residents do feel excluded. And even writing this report, residents weren't part of the process of being included about, consulted on what should be in the report. So, we're not learning the lessons from previous housing scandals and so that clearly. But I wanted to ask about procurement because residents have been told that the remaining works will cost in the region of £6 to £10 million. So, what tender process has that quote gone through, and how can we ensure that that passes the sniff test? Because it's a very broad range. And also, why should anyone have confidence? It seems an extraordinary amount of money, up to £10 million. Do you think that is getting value for money?
In terms of where we are with procurement, the estimate for the remaining works is around about 5 million. 6 million. That's the estimate for works. We'll only know the true value of the cost of the works when we go out to tender. And what we are doing is we are going out to a fully compliant procurement process, and we're going through the SEC framework. So what we will do, we're preparing all the documentation, all the tender specification, all that kind of thing, and then it will go to a tender where there'll be because the framework that we're going through has a lot of contractors on there. So we're expecting quite a number of bids in response to the tender documents that we'll send out. We had, as Councillor Crine explained earlier, we have got a resident who has agreed to join the procurement panel. So we'll work with officers in the submission bids. So we'll be looking at not just cost, we'll also be looking at, members will recall from previous reports that previous tenders have effectively been based on price only, where the quality submissions have not really focused as much as they should. So the panel, of procurement panel, which will include the resident, will be looking at the quality submissions that are made. We'll be looking at cost and how those costs relate to the budget and how those costs relate to the various elements of work. So this is exactly what members have said should have happened with the previous tender. It will go to a fully blown procurement process. It does take time to go through those processes, but it's time that absolutely needs to be taken to get this right. In terms of costings, it might be worth me explaining to councillors as well, and this committee particularly, that we've also been taking a look at some elements of work that will have to be duplicated because of the way things happen. If I take a very obvious example, scaffolding. When we had the scaffolding up to do the first phase of the works, we didn't do the roof, for example, of that scaffolding because it's going to have new rooftop homes on there. And other works that could have been done on that scaffolding weren't done at that time, but they will be done under the next phase of the works. We're not going to be recharging the whole cost of those scaffolding to leaseholders as part of the service charges. And it's, forgive me, it's something that I do always stress and possibly overstress, so forgive me for that, but it's not just leaseholders that are paying for these works, it's our tenants as well. But it's really important that we recognise that those charges that are applicable to leaseholders are relevant because it's a big bill that lands on, as you, Councillor Chairman, you expressed there, it's a big bill that comes through that letterbox, whereas our tenants have been paying it from their rents throughout a period of years. So this is a fully blown procurement process. It will be done on a quality and price basis. We will have resident participation involvement. We will have to go through the procurement processes that we need to do internally, and so it will be vetted by our colleagues in procurement and ultimately signed off in the correct way, whether that be through cabinet or member delegation. But it will have all of those, and it will be entirely different to the last one.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'd like to echo what Councillor Chamberlain said and what others have said tonight, that there's a bit of a sense of deja vu. It just feels like here we are again listening to another scandal, and it's almost like it's been looked at and then there's a sense that, okay, we're done now. But certainly if I think about just emails I've had this week from leaseholders and from residents in my ward, I can think of contractors parking in disabled parking. I think that was raised. Scaffolding that's been left up for months, and it only comes down when residents raise it. Contractors being rude, and I think the point just there around the fact that these are costs that are actually being borne by human beings who are our neighbours and our friends. And I think it really does need to be that point around leaseholders, that these are massive numbers that people are getting hit with. And Councillor Shitty, you know about in Cherry Garden, that's just one case that's live right now in my ward. I'm hearing about it from multiple ones. I still have leaseholders in my ward who are waiting on final bills from pre-COVID era for major works in the Four Squares. They ask every single year for that final bill and it is never forthcoming. And then they struggle to sell their properties. And the impact that has on families who are stuck in homes that they cannot sell and that are no longer suitable for their needs, I think should not be underestimated. So I think it comes back to that point around, as I say, this really is being looked at as a systemic issue. It's like, it is Arica House, it's Kirby, it's Devon Mansions, it's Chiltern Grove. But actually, it's a systemic cultural problem. And I really think we need to have a grip on that. And I just, as I say, I'm just waiting for the next scandal to arise. Thinking of Thaxted and Damery in my ward, which were going to be rooftop developments, which are cancelled. If you go around those buildings, it is quite frankly, it's disgraceful. So maybe Councillor Shitu and Hakeem, if you can come on a walk around those, I'd be very grateful because they are embarrassing in 2025 in this city.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Just to say yes, I'm willing to join you on the estate itself, but just to say on a more wider basis, I appreciate kind of what you set out that obviously when you have one after the other, that ordinarily there will be concern as to whether there will be more coming out itself. I think the most important thing is that we need to reassure you that there wouldn't be any new issues going forward in terms of more recent stuff, and to reassure you that actually we have got things on the hand. And I'll probably hand over to Akim to kind of explain to you, which hopefully will reassure you in terms of the contract monitoring process, because some of these issues have happened because we haven't monitored contracts in perhaps the right.
But I think it's the point that it feels like it's all too often the tenants and the leaseholders, the residents themselves who are having to do the contract management and monitoring.
Okay, hold on. You've had your question.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. I have visited Damery and Thaxted, and I agree with you, they're not in good condition. And again, this is symptomatic of decision making in the sense that Abbeyfield, which is Damery and Thaxted, and what's the block we've demolished?
Thank you.
Maydew is an area where we want to build new homes, and we've been talking about building new homes on that side for a long time. And because of that, you restrict yourself on the amount of money you invest in those blocks because you might demolish them, and you don't want leaseholders to be landed with a heavy bill, and then a few years later come around and say you're going to demolish them. So that puts people in a state of flux, which is not great. I accept that. But I have had a discussion with Councillor Dennis, and on the basis that whatever decision we make on Damery and Thaxted, it will be with the residents there. And until we do, we have an obligation as a landlord to make sure that they live in good quality homes. So that is an acceptable situation. In terms of GRIP, again, I repeat, all of the schemes that we've discussed at this commission are historical. They are at least 3 years old. You will not find these issues in any recent major works that we're doing. All the recommendations that this commission and the Housing Scrutiny Commission have made, we have accepted without hesitation. And we have put in new procedures that we are following. And we have demonstrated to this commission on a scheme linking that exactly to the recommendations on how we have been following those recommendations. So I believe that this should be a thing of the past. I also want to say to the commission that if you read the reports of the reviews that have happened, you will see indication that officers have deferred to contractors in decision making previously. That is no longer the case. We have taken the reins of decision making on behalf of residents of this council and of this borough, and following discussions with them. So officers have been trained or are being trained properly. Managers are doing what they're supposed to do to manage the staff that are reporting to them, and to make sure that when we commission a contract, the terms of this contract are monitored, and we take the contractor to account on the things that they're meant to deliver to us.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Johnson next and Councillor Sheep.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit perplexed, I suppose. Am I correct in understanding that when the initial plan to do the rooftop extension and the major works was done, that the major works element of that should have been put out to tender, but wasn't because the decision was made that NG or the new company that it was would do it all? So it was kind of, we had a contract with them, so we awarded the work to them rather than go out to competitive tender for the initial work that was done many moons ago.
What the position actually was that Bungie, subsequently Ekman, did an partner agreement with for QHIP work, both sides. And they are generally, the partnering agreement was very, very well suited to those competitive. So when you get things like windows, size, numbers, doors, size, numbers, competitive items, work very well with that type of contract. What didn't work well with partnering arrangement, complex piece of work. So you're not saying there's 100 doors or 200, saying there's a foundation to go, underpinning to new homes to be built on top, you've got structural issues. They certainly don't lend themselves to that partnering. So for the QHIP work, it would have been perfectly correct in isolation to use that partnering. Didn't need to tender them, they'd all tendered the partnering agreement. It was a route of home with a complexity to that. And with hindsight, wonderful thing, that was the wrong decision. We should have maybe separated the QHIP work or put the whole thing as a package, put on tender as a package.
Another question. And then Councillor Shitty, you mentioned in your introduction that you and Hakeem go back and review major work going back to 2015, which I think is a good thing to do in terms of having a full understanding and knowledge of where things have gone wrong over the years, maybe, or maybe how, if we were to look at that scheme again now, how we would do it better. So that's a clear way to say how we're looking at Devon Mansion, kind of just say where we've gone wrong, what we didn't do then. I suppose what I'd like to understand is that, I suppose, on those major works that you are going to go and review, if you found things that you think were wrong or are wrong, is there a plan then that you would then maybe reopen those things and fix those issues that might arise? Or because it may not be, those residents may not have felt confident enough to engage or push back on the council in the way that we have seen residents in Devon Mansions and others really hold the council's task over where things have.
Very good question. I'll let Hakeem come in. So I think one of the other places that have been raised with me so far is Erica House. And again, I know the residents want there to be some form of, and I've spoken to Hakeem about that. That is on the review kind of at the moment itself. Look, my view of this is that if when we complete the review, and it's not going to be kind of just all review at a time, it will be, you get it, it will be for me and Hakeem to review them. If there are matters which raises significant concern, then those should be disclosed itself. I suspect that there would be quite a lot of aspects which are more operational in terms of what we should learn in terms of the council, which should improve our way of doing things. And I'm very conscious that are lessons which are not just going to end up on the shelf, and that for me, I'm saying to Hakeem and the officers that I want to see the outcome of all reviews, and that then means that I have sight of what the issues are, the gravity of the issues in those reviews, and make a determination whether there are matters which needs to come before the different decision-making bodies of the council itself. But it's very good questions in relation to that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Seaton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I sat down all evening listening. It's been a great experience, I've got to tell you. I think, based upon what I've heard so far, and I've got to say that many of the issues raised have been raised over previous years, of course. Therefore, with a deja vu that was used early. So I'm not going to comment on that, but I do want to address the issue of learning. And thank you for elucidating as to what will happen. But it does appear to be personnel based. So forgive me if you guys were not in present, because it's all guys. I'm sorry, fine. If you guys were not present, will this learning be lost to the council? And if it would be lost to the council, what is your recommendation to us for us to make our recommendations that we should do to protect what you've learned to date, and indeed will learn future months and years, please?
Very good question, Councillor Seaton. Because I'll be very sincere with you. So I've been speaking to quite a lot of residents so far, and I've been trying to reassure residents. And one of the things I get told is we've had a number of cabinet members for housing or council rooms so far. How are we so sure that you're going to be there in a year's time or 2 years' time? And invariably, what they mean by that is, I like what you're saying, but how is this going to continue in the long term? And that's something that I've been thinking about. I do agree with you that actually we need to pull all this learning together in a document, which certainly should be accessible itself. So that I think certainly should be a recommendation that a cabinet member goes away and perhaps come back with how that could manifest itself. And I'll have some thoughts about that, but I agree with you actually. Yes, knowing how kind of things change in a size of this kind of council itself, I think it's right. I mean, it's not just about kind of cabinet member itself. Officers may move on to better pasture. We want our officers to also grow in their careers, and of course, we need to make sure that those are retained as far as possible.
Yeah, but not just yet, though. We want to hang on to them for a little while.
If I may, Chair, just a couple of things. Councillor King, who is now the leader, was the cabinet member for council homes when the issue of, Devon Mansions, Canada Estate, and Kirby Estate came up. And what she said to me was, Hakeem, whatever new process we're going to implement has to be sustainable. It can't just be something that we do just to address this particular issue. So that was very clear to me. She didn't have to tell me that in the process, but she did. Yeah, Councillor Shito has been clear that all of the things that we've been discussing is not just about the now, it's about how, it's all part of our good landlord plan. And being a good landlord is not a flash in the pan thing. It means that you plant roots, that enable you to do things in a much better way. And then finally, one of the things that was found by the regulator is when they did the inspection, is that they were very happy with the plans we had for the things we had identified to address. But what they wanted to know was how we were going to ensure that that was sustained. So sustainability is a primary issue for us. And all of the things we're doing is about ensuring that that happens. So our transformation program is about embedding good culture, good practice, written down procedures, and then holding staff to account in decision making following those written down procedures.
If I may, Chair, just very quickly to say that clearly now we've got this new leadership, and I'm really pleased that you've just spoken. There has been a marked change in the quality of the housing department. Notwithstanding comments made thus far, there have been a marked change, and the direction is clearly in the positive, and it clearly meets the needs and aspirations both of residents, I say both tenants and of course leaseholders. And I believe for myself as a local member, the numbers of complaints I've received for housing has significantly reduced over the past 2 or 3 years.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sitting. I'll send you a bill.
He can be your new poster boy. Are there any other questions? Members? Okay, can I just say, I know you made reference to the Housing Commission and recommendations from there, but I think 3 areas have cropped up this evening, which I think we ought to comment on. Firstly, in relation to resident communications, and what I'd like to propose is a recommendation that all forms of media and meetings be fully utilised for communications with residents. That's one recommendation I'd like to make. The second is in relation to leaseholder charges, as we've heard. So I think that we need to call for full transparency on leaseholder charges from the start of the works to ensure that there's no duplication and that they are correctly charged in the first place. And that's the second recommendation. Then the third one is really just to echo what you quite eloquently just finished on, that the cabinet member be asked to draw the lessons that have been learnt together into a comprehensive document for the council's use. So I think we can all agree on that. Just on the point that you made, and it relates to the last question, I did go to the last cabinet meeting where we presented the recommendations from the Committee on Major Works, and I made it, Stephanie was there, I made it perfectly clear it wasn't really just about housing, but it was also about the council's culture. I made that absolutely clear when I made my presentation to the cabinet, and you know the need for rigorous strategic oversight, both of a political and a managerial nature, because you know I'm confident that that's working, as we've heard this evening. But yeah, it has to be drilled down across the council, both managerially and politically. So those points have been made. Okay, so if we can all agree those recommendations. Yes, sure.
On the first recommendation, take me again.
Yes, sorry, it's a bit clumsily worded because I had to do it off the top of my head, but all forms of media and meetings be fully utilised for communications with residents. What I'm trying to get at is
they're hybrid.
But yeah, and it's not just technology based, but because obviously we've heard examples of people that can't do one or the other or both even. There we are. Yes.
They absolutely do have to be hybrid because there are non-resident leaseholders who are unable to come to a face-to-face meeting. So they do on that. So hybrid is the only way it would really work for Chiltern Grove.
Great. Okay, that's agreed. We can move on. So thank you all for coming this evening. Appreciate all your comments and keep up the good work. Right, sorry, let's move on to item 7, which is the Cabinet response to the overview and scrutiny recommendations on the consort estate. So we have them, it's the arising from the scrutiny of the consort estate major works and the charges to leaseholders. So that's item 7 on the agenda, which is page 40. Any questions on this or any comments anybody wants to make? Or we note the cabinet report back? Noted. Thank you. Item 8 is the work programme. I've got a meeting tomorrow. Is it with yourself or is it with Irina? Oh, okay, fine. So I've got a meeting with the vice chair tomorrow to talk about agenda planning. Yeah. So is there any other comments on the work programme? No? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And that's the end of the meeting. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate you and all the comments you made. Thank you very much.